When billionaire CEO Sloan Davenport mockingly challenged her janitor to fly her helicopter with the words, "Do it and I'll marry you," she expected humiliation. Instead, she got the shock of her life as Owen Grant lifted off with military precision, leaving her speechless on the rooftop of her own empire. What she didn't know was that this quiet man mopping her floors carried secrets that would either save her crumbling company or destroy everything she'd built. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The 42nd floor of Davenport Industries pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass monument to ambition, its corner office commanding a view that stretched from Elliott Bay to the snow-capped Cascades. But Sloan Davenport wasn't admiring the scenery as she stood behind her mahogany desk, her emerald eyes blazing with fury at the quarterly reports scattered before her like accusatory evidence. 47%, she hissed, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. Our aerospace division has dropped 47% in 6 months, and you're telling me it's just market fluctuation. Kendrick Shaw, her longtime advisor and CFO, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with practiced calm. At 52, he possessed the kind of understated authority that made boardrooms listen, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, and his Armani suit immaculate despite the late hour. Sloan, you're being dramatic. Defense contracts are cyclical. We've weathered worse storms. Dramatic? Sloan's voice rose an octave, her usual composure cracking like ice under pressure. At 34, she had built Davenport Industries from her father's modest construction company into a billion-dollar conglomerate, and she hadn't done it by accepting failure. Kendrick, we're hemorrhaging money. Our biggest client just terminated their contract citing performance concerns. Performance concerns. Since when do we have performance concerns? The office door opened with barely a whisper, and both executives turned to see a figure in maintenance coveralls pushing a cleaning cart. Owen Grant moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to navigate corporate spaces without disturbing the important people. At 38, he possessed an understated presence that seemed to fold into Shadow's average height, lean build, dark hair kept military short, and eyes the color of storm clouds that never quite met anyone's gaze directly. Sorry, Owen murmured, his voice carrying the faintest trace of a southern accent. Didn't realize anyone was still here. I can come back later. Sloan barely glanced at him, her attention consumed by the financial catastrophe spread across her desk. No, it's fine. We'll be done soon. She turned back to Kendrick, lowering her voice. What about the Morrison deal? Please tell me that's still on track. Kendrick's expression grew carefully neutral. There have been some complications. What kind of complications? Sloan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Meanwhile, Owen moved through the office with methodical efficiency, emptying wastebaskets and dusting surfaces. To any observer, he appeared completely absorbed in his work, but his ears caught every word of the hushed conversation. His movements never paused, never indicated he was listening, yet somehow he managed to position himself closer to the desk. Morrison is having second thoughts about our manufacturing capabilities, Kendrick continued. Apparently, someone's been feeding him information about our quality control issues. Quality control issues. Sloan's laugh held no humor. We have the best quality control in the industry. Who the hell is spreading lies about? She stopped mid-sentence as her phone buzzed. The caller ID made her stomach drop. Richard Morrison himself. Owen finished dusting the bookshelf near the window and moved toward the executive bathroom, his reflection briefly visible in the darkened glass. For just a moment, his carefully neutral expression shifted, revealing something sharp and calculating beneath the surface, the look of someone processing tactical information. Sloan answered the call with forced brightness. Richard, I was just thinking about you. The voice on the other end was crisp and businesslike. Sloan, we need to talk. I'm afraid I have some concerns about moving forward with our partnership. Concerns. Sloan's eyes found Kendrick's, and she saw something flicker across his face. Was it relief? Richard, I thought we'd addressed all your questions. Our proposal exceeded every specification you requested. Yes, well, that was before I learned about the safety violations at your Tacoma facility. 3 incidents in 2 months, Sloan. That's not the kind of track record I can stake Morrison defense on. Sloane's blood turned to ice. The Tacoma facility had indeed experienced some minor issues, but they were hardly violations, and more importantly, they were supposed to be confidential. Richard, I think there's been some miscommunication. Those incidents were minor equipment calibrations, nothing that affected safety or quality. Who told you? I can't reveal my sources, but the information came from someone very close to your operation. Someone who felt duty-bound to warn us before we committed $200 million to a partnership that could compromise our reputation. The line went dead, leaving Sloane staring at her phone in disbelief. $200 million gone. Just like that. She looked up at Kendrick, whose expression had shifted to what might have been sympathy if she didn't know him better. Who knew about Tacoma? She asked quietly. Sloane, you're upset. Let's not start pointing fingers. Who knew Kendrick? Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Owen emerged from the bathroom, his cleaning supplies neatly arranged on his cart. He moved toward the door with the same unobtrusive efficiency, but something about his posture had changed subtly, his shoulders a fraction straighter, his steps more purposeful. The report was classified, Kendrick said carefully. Only department heads and board members had access. And you? Sloane's eyes narrowed. You had access. Kendrick's laugh was forced. Are you seriously suggesting I sabotaged our own deal? Sloane, you're being paranoid. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got your father into trouble. The mention of her father hit like a physical blow. Thomas Davenport had built the company on trust and handshake deals, only to be betrayed by partners who smiled to his face while stealing his innovations. His heart attack at 58 had been as much from betrayal as from blocked arteries. Don't, Sloane whispered, her voice shaking with rage. Don't you dare bring my father into this. Owen paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, his reflection in the glass showed an expression of barely contained anger, as if he'd heard something that violated every principle he held dear. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of invisible servitude. I'm sorry, Kendrick said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I know you're under stress, but we need to face facts. The market is changing, and maybe it's time to consider alternative strategies. Alternative strategies? Sloane's voice rose again. Kendrick, this company is my life. Everything I've worked for. Everything my father built. Your father built a construction company. Kendrick interrupted, his mask finally slipping. You turned it into something it was never meant to be. Maybe it's time to scale back, focus on what we do well, instead of trying to compete with the big boys in aerospace and defense. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Sloane stared at Kendrick as if seeing him for the first time, noting the way his eyes avoided hers, the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his briefcase, all tells she'd learned to read in hostile negotiations. Get out, she said quietly. Sloane, get out of my office, now. Kendrick gathered his papers with deliberate calm, but Sloane caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. We'll talk tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly. He paused at the door. Oh, and Sloane, you might want to consider that offer from Meridian Corp. Their buyout price is generous, and given our current difficulties, it might be the smart play. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Sloane alone with her thoughts and the quiet janitor who was still arranging his cleaning supplies. She sank into her chair, suddenly feeling every one of her 34 years. Meridian Corp. Her biggest competitor, run by sharks, who would strip Davenport Industries for parts and scatter her employees to the wind. Rough night. The voice was so unexpected that Sloane's head snapped up. Owen was looking directly at her for the first time since entering the office, and his storm-gray eyes held an intelligence that seemed completely at odds with his humble station. Excuse me, she managed. Owen straightened from his cart, and somehow the movement made him seem taller, more substantial. I said it sounds like a rough night. That call sounded important. Sloane blinked, unsure how to respond. In 3 years of seeing this man clean her office, she couldn't remember him ever speaking beyond basic pleasantries. It's a business matter. Nothing you need to worry about. A small smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth. Ma'am, I've been cleaning offices in this building for 3 years. You pick up things. And what I picked up tonight doesn't sound good for anyone who works here. There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that made Sloane look at him more carefully. His hands, she noticed for the first time, weren't the soft hands of someone who'd only known cleaning supplies. They were scarred and calloused in patterns that spoke of different kinds of work. Harder work. You were listening, she accused, though without real anger. Hard not to, Owen replied simply. Sound carries in these glass boxes. And when someone's talking about destroying people's livelihoods, he shrugged. Well, that affects folks like me more than most. Sloane studied his face, searching for something she couldn't quite name. What's your name? Your real name, not what's on the cleaning service roster. Owen Grant. He said it without hesitation, meeting her gaze steadily. And what do you think you know about my business, Owen Grant? Owen moved closer to her desk, his earlier invisibility completely shed. I know that your CFO just walked out of here looking like Christmas morning, which is interesting timing considering you just lost a $200 million deal. I know that someone leaked classified information about your Tacoma facility information that would have taken intimate knowledge of your operations to obtain, and I know that whoever did it is probably planning to do it again. Sloane's breath caught. How could you possibly? Because I've seen it before, Owen said simply. Different uniforms, same betrayal. Corporate espionage isn't that different from military intelligence, ma'am, just different stakes. Military intelligence. Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. Owen's expression closed off slightly, as if he'd revealed more than intended. Former life. These days I push a mop and try to stay invisible. Why? The question escaped before Sloane could stop it. For a long moment, Owen didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire office. Because invisible people see things others miss. And sometimes that's exactly what's needed. Sloane felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of shared understanding. This man, this janitor, had just demonstrated more insight into her situation than any of her highly paid advisors. What else do you see? I see a woman who built something remarkable and refuses to let it die without a fight. I see someone who's surrounded by people telling her to give up when giving up is the last thing she should do. Owen's eyes held hers steadily. And I see someone who's about to make a decision that'll determine whether she survives this or gets buried by it. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Sloane's assistant, Mark, appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Ms. Davenport, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there's been an emergency. We need to get you to Vancouver tonight. The Peterson Group meeting has been moved up to tomorrow morning. If we don't sign them by noon, they're going with Meridian Corp instead. Sloane's heart sank. The Peterson Group contract represented 6 months of negotiations and $50 million in revenue money she desperately needed to keep the company afloat. But Vancouver was a 4-hour drive and commercial flights were done for the night. What about the corporate jet? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Mark's expression was grim. Maintenance issues. Won't be ready until Thursday. Charter flight. I tried every service in Seattle. Nothing available on this short notice, and the weather's turning bad. Storm system moving in from the Pacific. Sloane closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Everything was falling apart at once, as if orchestrated by some malevolent force. When she opened them again, Owen was watching her with an unreadable expression. What about the helicopter? Owen asked quietly. Mark looked confused. What helicopter? The one on the roof. Owen continued, his eyes never leaving Sloane's face. Executive transport. Augusta 109, if I'm not mistaken. Sloane stared at him. The helicopter was her father's old indulgence, purchased during the company's early success and rarely used since his death. It had been sitting on the building's helipad for months, supposedly maintained, but essentially forgotten. How do you know about... I cleaned the helipad, Owen said simply. Beautiful machine, still airworthy from what I can tell. Ma'am, Mark interjected. Even if the helicopter is available, we'd need a pilot. Licensed commercial pilots aren't exactly... I can fly it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sloane felt her world tilt slightly as if reality had shifted just enough to reveal possibilities she'd never considered. You can what? She whispered. Owen's expression was completely serious. I can fly that helicopter to Vancouver and have you at your meeting with time to spare. Weather's going to be rough, but nothing that bird can't handle with the right pilot. Mark laughed nervously. Sir, with all due respect, operating a commercial aircraft requires FAA commercial rotorcraft license instrument rating and minimum 1,500 hours flight time. Owen recited without hesitation. I have all three. Sloane's mind reeled. You're a helicopter pilot, among other things. Owen's smile was enigmatic. Question is, do you trust me enough to bet your company on it? The office fell silent as Sloane processed this impossible turn of events. Her janitor, a man she'd barely noticed for 3 years, was offering to literally fly her out of the crisis that threatened to destroy everything she'd built. It was insane. It was desperate. It was prove it, she heard herself say. Owen raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, prove you can fly. Sloane stood up her decision, crystallizing with each word. If you can get that helicopter off the ground and bring it back down safely, I'll trust you with Vancouver. Hell, I'll trust you with whatever you say I should trust you with. A strange light entered Owen's eyes. And if I can't? Sloane felt a reckless energy building inside her, the same feeling she'd had when she'd mortgaged everything to buy her first aerospace contract. Then I guess we'll find out together what happens when you crash a helicopter with a billionaire CEO inside. Mark's face went pale. Ms. Davenport, you can't be serious. This is exactly what I'm going to do. Sloane cut him off. She looked directly at Owen, really seeing him for the first time. What do you say, Mr. Grant, ready to take me for a ride? Owen's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him in 3 years of passing encounters. Ma'am, I thought you'd never ask. The elevator ride to the roof seemed to take forever, filled with Mark's increasingly frantic attempts to talk Sloane out of what he called corporate suicide by aviation. But Sloane barely heard him. Her attention was focused entirely on Owen, who stood beside her with a calm confidence that seemed to radiate from his very core. Tell me something, she said as they reached the top floor. In all those years of cleaning my office, what did you really think of me? Owen considered the question seriously. I thought you were someone who'd forgotten that the best view isn't always from the top floor. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to see what's really happening. And now I think you're about to remember. The rooftop helipad was a small oasis of functionality atop the glass and steel tower, its landing lights creating a circle of illumination against the darkening Seattle sky. The Augusta 109 sat in the center like a sleeping predator, its sleek lines and powerful rotors speaking of speed and precision. Owen approached the aircraft with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. His hands moved over the exterior with practiced efficiency, checking control surfaces, inspecting rotor blades, testing the tension of cables with touches so subtle they might have been caresses. Beautiful machine, he murmured more to himself than to Sloane. Your father had good taste. How did you know it was my father's? Sloane asked, surprised by the pang of emotion his words triggered. Owen paused in his inspection, his expression softening. Thomas Davenport was a pilot in Vietnam. Huey Commander 2 tours. When a man like that buys a helicopter, he doesn't choose it for show. He chooses it because he understands what it means to trust your life to a machine that won't let you down. Sloane felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never known her father had flown in Vietnam. He'd rarely spoken of his service. How could you possibly know that? Because, Owen said quietly, opening the cockpit door with movements that spoke of absolute familiarity. I recognize another warrior when I see one, even when he's gone. The interior of the helicopter was immaculate, clearly maintained, despite its apparent disuse. Owen slipped into the pilot's seat as if he belonged there, his hands finding controls and switches with muscle memory that spoke of countless hours in similar cockpits. Last chance to change your mind, he said as Sloane climbed into the passenger seat beside him. Once we're airborne, you're committed. Sloane buckled her harness with hands that trembled only slightly. Mr. Grant, I've been committed since the moment I decided to trust you. The only question now is whether you're as good as you claim to be. Owen's hands moved over the startup sequence with balletic precision fuel pumps, hydraulics, electrical systems coming online in perfect order. The turbine began to whine, building to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through Sloane's very bones. You know, Owen said conversationally as the rotor blades began their slow rotation. Most people would consider this pretty crazy, trusting a janitor to fly them in a helicopter they haven't seen started in months. Most people, Sloane replied, watching his hands work with hypnotic skill, didn't build a billion-dollar company by playing it safe. The rotor wash began to buffet the helipad as Owen brought the engines to full power. Through the windscreen, Sloane could see Mark backing away from the aircraft, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling lawyers, emergency services, or both. Control, this is Augusta 77 Delta requesting departure clearance. Owen spoke into his headset with the calm professionalism of someone who'd done this routine thousands of times. The radio crackled back, 77 Delta, you are cleared for departure. Be advised, weather system approaching from the west, winds gusting to 30 knots. Copy weather advisory. 77 Delta departing to the south. Owen's left hand moved to the collective control, his right to the cyclic stick, his feet finding the anti-torque pedals with unconscious precision. For a moment, the helicopter seemed to hesitate, balanced on the knife edge between earth and sky. Then they lifted. The sensation was unlike anything Sloane had ever experienced. Not the mechanical thunder of a commercial airliner, but something more intimate and immediate. The helicopter rose with liquid grace, the lights of Seattle spreading out below them like a constellation of human ambition. Oh my God, Sloane breathed, pressing her face to the window as her building fell away beneath them. From this height, the corporate empire she'd built looked fragile and temporary, just another cluster of lights in the vast tapestry of the city. Different perspective, isn't it? Owen's voice was warm with understanding. Sometimes you have to step back to see the bigger picture. As they climbed higher, Sloane found herself studying Owen's profile in the green glow of the instrument panel. Every movement was economical and precise, his eyes constantly scanning gauges and horizon with the automatic competence of someone for whom aviation wasn't a job. It was a calling. Who are you really? She asked over the intercom. Owen was quiet for so long that Sloane thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to echo with ghosts. Once upon a time, I was Colonel Owen Grant, United States Air Force, Rotary Wing Commander, Special Operations. I flew missions in places that don't officially exist, bringing people home from situations that never happened. Sloane felt her breath catch. What happened? Life happened. People I trusted betrayed that trust. People I loved paid the price. Owen's hands never wavered on the controls, but Sloane caught the slight tightening around his eyes. So I decided to disappear, become invisible. Let the world think Colonel Grant died with the rest of his unit. But you didn't die. No, Owen said quietly, banking the helicopter in a wide turn that brought the Seattle skyline into perfect view. I just learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is someone nobody notices. Someone who can see everything and move through any space without triggering alarms. They flew in comfortable silence for several minutes, the city sliding past beneath them like a living map. Sloane found herself relaxing for the first time in months, the constant pressure of corporate warfare temporarily forgotten in the simple pleasure of flight. You know, she said eventually, when I challenged you to fly this helicopter, I was being sarcastic. I expected you to make excuses, maybe laugh it off. Owen's smile was visible in the reflection of the side window. And when I accepted your challenge, what were you expecting? Honestly, I was expecting you to crash us both into the side of a building. Sloane laughed, surprised by her own honesty. Instead, you're flying this thing like you were born in a cockpit. Maybe I was. Owen began their descent back toward the building, the approach so smooth it felt like they were being lowered by invisible hands. The question is, What are you going to do with this information? What do you mean? I mean, Owen said as the helipad rose to meet them, you now know that your janitor is actually a decorated military pilot with skills that could be useful in ways you haven't even considered. The question is whether you're going to keep pretending I'm invisible or start thinking about what else might be hiding in plain sight around your company. The landing was perfect, a gentle settling onto the pad as if the helicopter was simply returning to its natural resting place. As the rotors wound down and the engines fell silent, Sloane sat in stunned contemplation of what had just occurred. That was, she began, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to describe the experience. That was a demonstration, Owen said, completing his shutdown checklist with the same methodical precision he'd used for startup. The real question is what you're going to do about Vancouver. Vancouver. In her amazement at Owen's piloting skills, Sloane had almost forgotten the crisis that had precipitated this entire extraordinary evening. The Peterson Group meeting was still scheduled for tomorrow morning, and she still needed to be there if she wanted to save her company. Can you really get me to Vancouver? She asked. Owen checked his watch and consulted a weather display on the instrument panel. Storm's moving in faster than predicted, but we can stay ahead of it. 2 hours flight time including fuel stop in Bellingham. You'll be at your meeting with time to spare. Sloane made her decision with the same instinctive certainty that had built her empire. Then let's go save my company, Mr. Grant. As they prepared for the longer flight to Vancouver, Mark approached the helicopter with obvious reluctance. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he handed Sloane her briefcase and overnight bag. Ms. Davenport, he said through the intercom, I have to officially advise against this course of action, flying into a storm with an unvetted pilot. Mark Sloane interrupted gently. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one. Mr. Grant has just demonstrated capabilities that nobody in our organization knew existed. Maybe it's time we started paying attention to what we don't know about the people around us. As they lifted off for the second time that evening, Sloane caught sight of several figures watching from office windows below. Word was spreading through the building that their CEO was flying into a storm with the janitor as her pilot. By morning, the story would be legend, assuming they survived to see morning. Nervous? Owen asked as they cleared Seattle airspace and turned north toward the Canadian border. Terrified, Sloane admitted. But not about the flying. You've convinced me you can handle that. I'm terrified about what happens if I can't close this deal. $50 million, Owen. That's what stands between my company and bankruptcy. Tell me about the Peterson Group, Owen said as they climbed through layers of clouds that were beginning to thicken ominously. What do they want that Meridian Corp can't give them? Sloane outlined the contract, a revolutionary guidance system for commercial drones that could transform everything from package delivery to search and rescue operations. It was exactly the kind of innovative technology that could establish Davenport Industries as a leader in the emerging unmanned systems market. Sounds like something worth fighting for, Owen observed. What's their hesitation? They think we're too small, too volatile. They want stability, proven track record, guaranteed delivery schedules. Sloane's voice was bitter. Everything that Meridian Corp can offer, and we can't. Maybe, Owen said thoughtfully, they're not looking for what Meridian Corp offers. Maybe they're looking for something else entirely. Like what? Owen was quiet for several minutes, his attention focused on navigating around a particularly dense cloud formation. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. In special operations, we had a saying, when you can't match the enemy's strengths, make them irrelevant. You're trying to compete with Meridian Corp on their terms, size, stability, corporate resources. But what if those aren't the terms that matter? I don't understand. What does Meridian Corp want from the Peterson Group? Sloane considered the question. Market dominance. They want to control the commercial drone sector by acquiring the best technology. And what do you want? I want to build something that matters, something that makes the world better, not just more profitable. Owen smiled in the green glow of the instrument panel. There's your advantage. Meridian Corp wants to own the Peterson Group's technology. You want to partner with them to develop it. Which do you think sounds more appealing to innovators? As they flew through the darkening sky, Sloane found herself seeing the situation from an entirely new perspective. She'd been so focused on matching Meridian Corp's corporate muscle that she'd forgotten what had made Davenport Industries successful in the first place. The willingness to take risks, to innovate, to treat partners as collaborators rather than acquisitions. "You know," she said as the lights of Vancouver began to appear through breaks in the clouds, "for a janitor, you have some pretty sophisticated insights into corporate strategy." "For a CEO," Owen replied, beginning their descent toward the city, "you have some pretty good instincts when you trust them." The landing at Vancouver International Airport was more challenging than their Seattle departure with crosswinds gusting from the approaching storm system. But Owen handled the helicopter with the same calm competence he'd displayed all evening, touching down on the designated helipad as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. As they secured the aircraft and arranged ground transportation to Sloane's hotel, she found herself studying Owen with new eyes. The transformation from invisible janitor to confident pilot had been so complete that she wondered how she'd ever missed the signs of his true capabilities. "This isn't over, is it?" she said as they waited for the taxi. "Tomorrow morning after the meeting, you're not just going to disappear back into the maintenance crew." Owen's expression was unreadable in the airport lighting. "That depends entirely on you, Ms. Davenport. I've spent 3 years watching your company from the shadows. I've seen its strengths and its weaknesses, its opportunities and its threats. The question is whether you want to keep flying blind or start using all available intelligence." As the taxi pulled up to take Sloane to her hotel, she made a decision that would change everything for both of them. "Mr. Grant," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that felt more like a treaty than a handshake. "When we get back to Seattle, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the future of Davenport Industries, and about what other surprises might be hiding in plain sight." Owen's smile was the expression of a man who had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. "Ma'am, I think that conversation is long overdue." As the taxi disappeared into the Vancouver night, carrying Sloane toward what might be the most important meeting of her career, Owen stood alone on the tarmac beside the helicopter that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new possibilities neither of them could yet imagine. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Colonel Owen Grant allowed himself to hope that his long exile in the shadows might finally be coming to an end. The morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Fairmont Pacific Rim should have felt like victory, but Sloane Davenport found herself staring at her reflection in the hotel mirror with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The Peterson Group meeting had exceeded every expectation, not because of her polished presentation or carefully rehearsed talking points, but because of a single moment when she'd abandoned her script entirely. "Ms. Davenport," Harrison Peterson had said midway through her pitch, his weathered face creased with skepticism. "You're telling me everything Meridian Corp has already promised, just with smaller numbers. Why should we choose uncertainty over guaranteed market dominance?" That's when Owen's words had echoed in her mind. When you can't match the enemy's strengths, make them irrelevant. Instead of defending her company's size, she'd leaned forward and spoken from the heart. "Mr. Peterson, Meridian Corp wants to buy your innovation and bury it in their corporate machine. They'll turn your revolutionary technology into just another product line managed by committees and constrained by quarterly profit targets. We want to set it free. We want to give you the resources to push boundaries. They wouldn't dare cross to take risks they can't afford to build something that changes the world, instead of just dominating it." The silence that followed had stretched for an eternity before Peterson's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had leaned forward with genuine interest. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A true partnership," Sloane had replied, abandoning her prepared slides entirely. "You keep full control of research and development. We provide manufacturing capability, market access, and operational support. Instead of selling your company, you're expanding it. Instead of becoming employees, you become partners." Now, 12 hours later, she held a signed letter of intent worth $50 million with performance bonuses that could double that figure if their joint ventures succeeded. But the victory felt hollow without someone to share it with, and the person she most wanted to tell was currently flying their helicopter through Canadian airspace, probably wondering if she'd managed to save her company or if he'd witness its final collapse from 30,000 feet. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Weather clearing, ETA Seattle 14:30. Hope the meeting went well. OG. Sloan smiled despite her exhaustion. Even in text messages, Owen maintained his enigmatic brevity. She typed back, "Better than well. We need to talk when I get back, about everything." The response came immediately. "Looking forward to it." 3 hours later, as Owen guided the Augusta 109 through the clear autumn air above Puget Sound, Sloan found herself studying his profile with new awareness. Yesterday, she'd seen him as an employee, invisible, interchangeable beneath notice. Today, she saw him as a mystery wrapped in janitor's coveralls, a man whose true capabilities might represent the key to her company's survival. "So," she said through the intercom as downtown Seattle appeared on the horizon, "are you going to tell me how a decorated Air Force colonel ended up pushing a mop in my building?" Owen's hands never moved from the controls, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "That's a longer story than we have flight time for." "Then give me the short version." For several minutes, the only sounds were the helicopter's engines and the whisper of wind over the rotors. When Owen finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Afghanistan 2019. I was leading a joint task force special operations working with local allies to establish secure corridors for humanitarian aid. We'd spent months building relationships, earning trust, making real progress." He paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Then someone in Washington decided our mission was too expensive and our methods were too unconventional. They sent in a replacement commander who thought he could accomplish in weeks what had taken us months to build." Sloan waited, sensing there was more, and that it was painful to tell. 3 days after I was reassigned to a desk job in the Pentagon, my replacement walked my team into an ambush. Bad intelligence compromised operations' complete breakdown of the trust networks we'd spent a year developing. Owen's voice remained steady, but Sloan heard the controlled emotion beneath. 17 good people died because someone thought they could improve on what was working. "I'm sorry," Sloan said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "The worst part wasn't the casualties." Owen continued, beginning their descent toward the familiar Seattle skyline. "It was discovering that the intelligence failure wasn't accidental. Someone in the Pentagon had been feeding information to defense contractors, including details about our operations. My team died so someone could profit from the cleanup contracts." Sloan felt a chill that had nothing to do with altitude. "Military contractors, Meridian Corporation's defense division." Owen's voice was flat, emotionless, but Sloan caught the flash of something dangerous in his eyes. They knew exactly which areas would need security consultants after our operations failed. Amazing how quickly they mobilized resources to fill the gaps. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "That's why you're here. That's why you took a job at Davenport Industries." Owen touched down on the helipad with his characteristic precision, but this time Sloan noticed the way his hands lingered on the controls, the careful, methodical shutdown of someone who'd learned never to leave anything to chance. "I needed to disappear," he said, as the rotors wound down. New identity, new life, someplace where Colonel Owen Grant was just a name in a classified file. "Your father's company offered anonymity and a chance to stay invisible while I figured out what came next." "But you stayed invisible for 3 years, Sloan pointed out. "Why reveal yourself now?" Owen shut down the final systems and turned to face her directly. "Because yesterday, listening to your CFO sabotage your company, I heard the same kind of betrayal that killed my team. And because someone who builds something worth protecting deserves better than to watch it destroyed by people they trust." As they descended from the helipad into the corporate world that had seemed so solid just 24 hours earlier, Sloan felt the ground shifting beneath her feet in ways that had nothing to do with elevation. The building looked the same, gleaming glass and steel reaching toward the Seattle sky, but everything else had changed. The employees she passed in the corridors might not be who they seemed. The advisors she trusted might be working against her. The very foundations of her empire might be compromised in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Ms. Davenport." Mark appeared as they reached the executive floor, his relief palpable. Thank God you're safe. When you took off in that helicopter with... He stopped, noticing Owen's presence with obvious confusion. I mean, how did the meeting go? Better than expected, Sloan replied, noting how Mark's eyes kept darting between her and Owen. We have a signed letter of intent, $50 million with performance bonuses. Mark's expression shifted from relief to amazement. $50 million. But I thought... Kendrick said the deal was dead, that Peterson had already decided on Meridian Corp. Kendrick said that... Sloan's voice was dangerously quiet. When, this morning around 9, he called an emergency staff meeting to discuss damage control strategies and succession planning. Mark's discomfort was obvious. He said Vancouver was a lost cause and we needed to start preparing for transition scenarios. Sloan felt her blood pressure rising. Transition scenarios, potential buyout offers, severance packages, asset liquidation procedures. Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. Ma'am, half the senior staff thinks you're about to sell the company. Owen stepped forward slightly, his presence suddenly more substantial. Where's Kendrick now? Mark looked surprised by the janitor's question, but something in Owen's tone made him answer automatically. Conference room B. He's meeting with department heads about restructuring options. How long has that meeting been going on? Owen pressed. About 2 hours. It's supposed to be confidential, but... Mark glanced around nervously. People are scared. There are rumors about massive layoffs, facility closures, maybe even bankruptcy proceedings. Sloan felt the carefully constructed victory of her Vancouver triumph crumbling around her. While she'd been securing the future of her company, her CFO had been systematically destroying confidence in that future. I need to see this meeting. Ma'am, it's a closed session. Mark. Sloan's voice carried the authority that had built an empire. I own this company. No meeting in this building is closed to me. As they walked toward the conference room, Owen fell into step beside her, his earlier invisibility completely abandoned. Before you confront him, he said quietly, you should know that emergency staff meetings aren't normally called unless someone has advanced knowledge of specific threats. What do you mean? I mean, Kendrick knew your Vancouver meeting would fail before you even left Seattle. The question is why he was so certain. They could hear voices through the conference room's glass walls, Kendrick's measured tones dominating the discussion, while department heads listened with expressions ranging from resignation to barely contained panic. Sloan recognized the body language of people being told their world was ending. Realistic about our situation, Kendrick was saying as they approached. Ms. Davenport's Vancouver trip was a last-ditch effort, but Peterson Group has already indicated they're moving forward with Meridian Corp. We need to start preparing for the inevitable. Sloan's hand was on the door handle when Owen caught her arm gently. Wait, he murmured. Let him finish. Sometimes the most revealing information comes when people think they're not being observed. Through the glass, they could see Kendrick consulting a tablet with practiced authority. I've been in preliminary discussions with Meridian Corp's acquisition team. They're prepared to make a generous offer 70 cents on the dollar for all assets with retention packages for essential personnel. What about the rest of us? Asked Janet Morrison, head of human resources. Her voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. Unfortunately, redundancies are inevitable in any merger scenario. Meridian Corp has their own infrastructure, their own teams. They won't need duplicate services. Kendrick's tone was sympathetic but firm. However, I want to assure everyone that I've negotiated enhanced severance packages as part of the transition agreement. Dr. Amanda Foster, the head of R&D, leaned forward with obvious distress. Kendrick, some of these projects have been years in development. The guidance system alone represents 18 months of work. If Meridian Corp acquires our technology, they'll have the resources to properly develop and market it, Kendrick interrupted smoothly. Let's be honest, Amanda, we're a mid-sized company trying to compete with industry giants. Sometimes the best outcome is knowing when to step aside gracefully. Sloan felt Owen's grip tighten slightly on her arm. His expression had gone cold, calculating the look of someone processing tactical intelligence. Notice how he's framing this, he whispered, not as a possibility but as a foregone conclusion. And notice how he keeps mentioning his negotiations with Meridian Corp. You mean he's been talking to them behind my back? I mean, he's been talking to them like someone who already has authority to make deals. Owen's voice was grim. That's not an advisor giving counsel. That's someone executing a plan. The conference room door opened, and Sloane strode in with Owen close behind. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, faces turned toward her with expressions of shock relief, and in Kendrick's case, something that might have been annoyance. Ms. Davenport, Janet Morrison's voice was bright with genuine relief. You're back. How did Vancouver go? Vancouver went very well, thank you, Janet. Sloane's eyes swept the room before settling on Kendrick. I'm curious about this meeting, though. I don't recall authorizing any discussions about merger scenarios or severance packages. Kendrick recovered his composure with practiced ease. Sloane, I know this looks bad, but I was simply trying to prepare for various contingencies, given the challenges we've been facing. What challenges? Sloane's voice was silk over steel. Our Vancouver meeting resulted in a signed letter of intent for $50 million. The Peterson Group has chosen us over Meridian Corp. I'd say our challenges are looking considerably more manageable. The silence that followed was profound. Department heads exchanged glances of amazement and confusion, while Kendrick's carefully maintained composure cracked just enough to reveal genuine shock. 50 million, Dr. Foster breathed. Sloane, that's incredible. But Kendrick said, what exactly did Kendrick say? Sloane interrupted her gaze, never leaving her CFO's face. The uncomfortable silence stretched until Janet Morrison spoke up hesitantly. He said the Peterson Group had already decided on Meridian Corp, that Vancouver was just a formality and you'd probably get confirmation of their decision during the meeting. Really? Sloane's voice was dangerously quiet. And how did Kendrick come by this information? All eyes turned to Kendrick, who had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Industry sources, market intelligence, the usual channels. Sloane, you have to understand, all indicators suggested. All indicators suggested what exactly? Owen's voice cut through the room like a blade. The department heads turned to stare at the man they'd seen countless times cleaning their offices, now speaking with unmistakable authority. Because from where I stand, it sounds like someone was awfully confident about the outcome of negotiations they weren't involved in. Kendrick's eyes narrowed as he focused on Owen for the first time. I'm sorry, who are you? Someone who's been watching and listening, Owen replied calmly. Someone who's noticed interesting patterns in communication, unusual interest in classified reports, and a remarkable ability to predict outcomes that should have been impossible to forecast. The conference room fell silent as the implications of Owen's words settled over the assembled executives. Sloane felt a strange sense of pieces falling into place, not just about Kendrick's betrayal, but about the man standing beside her who continued to reveal capabilities she'd never suspected. Kendrick, Sloane said quietly, I think you and I need to have a private conversation. Everyone else, thank you for your concern about the company's future. I assure you that future is considerably brighter than you've been led to believe. Janet, please prepare a company-wide announcement about the Peterson Group contract. Amanda, I want a full briefing on our R&D pipeline this afternoon. And everyone, she paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. The next time someone wants to discuss the company's future or potential mergers, I expect to be the first person informed. Are we clear? A chorus of agreement filled the room as department heads filed out, their expressions transformed from despair to cautious optimism. Soon only Sloane, Kendrick, and Owen remained. Sloane. Kendrick began, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd heard too often in recent months. I understand you're upset, but you have to realize I was only trying to protect the company's interests, given our recent difficulties. Our recent difficulties, Sloane interrupted, seem to have a common thread. Every crisis, every leaked report, every lost contract can be traced back to information that was supposedly confidential. Information that someone with access to our internal systems would have been able to provide to interested parties. Kendrick's composure finally cracked completely. Are you seriously accusing me of corporate espionage, Sloane? I've been with this company for 8 years. I've helped you build everything we've accomplished. No, Owen said quietly, stepping forward until he dominated the space between Kendrick and the door. You've been positioning yourself to profit from its destruction. The Morrison defense leaked the Tacoma facility reports the convenient timing of Meridian Corp's buyout offer. None of that happened in a vacuum. And you would know this. How exactly? Kendrick's voice was rising, his careful mask of corporate civility finally slipping. You're a janitor, for Christ's sake. What possible insight could you have into corporate operations? Owen's smile was cold as winter. The same insight that comes from 3 years of emptying wastebaskets, cleaning offices after hours, and being invisible to people who think their secrets are safe because the help doesn't matter. He reached into his coveralls and pulled out a small recording device, setting it on the conference table with deliberate precision. The same insight that comes from understanding that invisible people hear everything. Kendrick's face went pale as Owen pressed a button and his own voice filled the room. I've been in preliminary discussions with Meridian Corp's acquisition team. They're prepared to make a generous offer, 70 cents on the dollar for all assets. That's illegal, Kendrick whispered. Recording private conversations without consent is perfectly legal in Washington state as long as one party to the conversation knows about it, Owen replied calmly. And since I was present for your entire presentation, I qualified as a consenting party. Sloane felt a rush of something she couldn't quite name, gratitude, admiration, and underneath it all, a growing awareness that Owen Grant was proving to be far more than she'd ever imagined. Play the rest, she said quietly. Owen's finger moved to another button and Kendrick's voice continued. The key is making sure Davenport Industries looks unstable enough that the buyout seems like salvation rather than conquest. A few more strategic leaks, maybe some rumors about cash flow problems, and Meridian Corp will be able to acquire everything for a fraction of its actual value. The silence that followed was deafening. Kendrick stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him, as undeniable evidence of his betrayal filled the air. 8 years, Sloane said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 years. I trusted you. 8 years. I considered you family. Sloane, please. Get out! Her voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Clean out your office, surrender your company devices, and get out of my building. Security will escort you to ensure you don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. Sloane cut him off, her voice gaining strength with each word. This is my company, built with my vision and my risk. You chose to betray that trust for 30 pieces of silver from Meridian Corp. Now you get to live with the consequences. Kendrick's mask finally fell away completely, revealing the calculating opportunist beneath. You think this changes anything? Meridian Corp doesn't need me to destroy you. They have resources you can't even imagine, connections you'll never match. This little victory in Vancouver won't save you when they decide to crush you. Maybe not, Owen said conversationally, still blocking Kendrick's path to the door. But they'll have to do it without inside intelligence. And they'll have to do it against a company that now knows exactly what kind of fight it's in. As security escorted Kendrick from the building, Sloane sank into one of the conference room chairs, the emotional whiplash of the last 24 hours finally catching up with her. Victory in Vancouver, betrayal at home, revelations about the man she'd barely noticed for 3 years. It was almost too much to process. You recorded the whole thing, she said, looking at Owen with new eyes. You knew what he was going to do before we even got back from Vancouver. Owen nodded, taking the seat across from her. I've been watching him for months. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for: meetings with unknown contacts, encrypted communications, unusual interest in departments outside his purview. Classic intelligence gathering behavior. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you wouldn't have believed me. A janitor accusing your trusted CFO of corporate espionage, you'd have had me escorted out of the building. Owen's expression was rueful. Sometimes the most important truths can only be revealed when the time is right. Sloane studied his face, seeing layers of complexity she was only beginning to understand. You've been protecting my company. I've been protecting something worth protecting, Owen corrected gently. Your father built something that mattered, a company that cared about innovation over profit, people over stock prices. You've continued that legacy, even when it would have been easier to sell out to the highest bidder. That kind of integrity is rare in this world. And now? Sloane asked, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was asking. Owen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something beyond the conference room windows. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that seemed to change the very air between them. Now we rebuild. We identify every vulnerability Kendrick might have exposed, every contact he might have compromised, every piece of intelligence he might have shared. We turn your company into something that can't be destroyed by corporate predators or inside betrayal. Sloane's heart skipped slightly at the pronoun. If you'll have me. Owen's gray eyes met hers directly, not as a janitor and not as a ghost hiding from his past, as someone who understands that sometimes the best defense is making sure your enemies underestimate what they're really facing. Sloane felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of possibility that went far beyond corporate strategy or business partnerships. Looking at Owen Grant, she saw not just the decorated colonel or the mysterious janitor, but something else entirely, a man who had chosen to stand with her when everyone else was planning her company's funeral. Mr. Grant, she said formally, extending her hand across the conference table. I believe it's time we discussed your new position at Davenport Industries. Owen's smile was the first truly unguarded expression she'd seen from him in 3 years of silent encounters. Ms. Davenport, I thought you'd never ask. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the Seattle skyline, neither of them could have imagined that their newfound partnership would be tested by challenges that would make Kendrick's betrayal seem like a minor inconvenience. The real war for Davenport Industries was just beginning, and the enemies they'd face would require every skill Owen possessed and every ounce of courage Sloane could muster. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of revelation and decision, they had something that had been missing from both their lives for far too long, an ally, who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Sloane's life into before and after. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness of her penthouse bedroom, her mind still foggy with sleep, until she heard the panic in Mark's voice. Ms. Davenport, you need to get to the office immediately. There's been a security breach. Someone accessed our servers overnight and downloaded everything. Financial records, R&D files, client databases, everything. Sloane was already throwing on clothes, her heart hammering against her ribs. How bad is it? Bad enough that our insurance company is threatening to drop us, and the SEC is opening an investigation. But that's not the worst part. Mark's voice cracked slightly. Someone leaked the Peterson Group contract details to the press. Every tech blog in Seattle is running stories about how we allegedly misrepresented our capabilities to secure the deal. That's impossible. The contract terms were completely accurate. I know that and you know that, but the leaked documents have been altered. They show us promising delivery timelines we never agreed to, claiming technological capabilities we don't possess, and guaranteeing performance metrics that would be impossible to meet. Sloane felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet, but this time it felt less like corporate warfare and more like an earthquake. Where's Owen? That's what I was about to tell you. Mr. Grant never went home last night. Building security says he's been in the server room since about midnight running some kind of forensic analysis. 20 minutes later, Sloane emerged from the elevator on the 38th floor to find Owen hunched over multiple computer screens in the server room, his fingers flying across keyboards with the focused intensity of someone fighting a digital war. He'd shed his coveralls for dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look more like the military officer he'd once been. "Talk to me," she said without preamble. Owen didn't look up from his screens, but his voice carried the calm authority she was learning to associate with his most serious moments. Professional job. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for and how to find it. They bypassed our primary security protocols, installed custom malware to cover their tracks, and exfiltrated specific files while leaving digital fingerprints that point back to our own systems. English, please. Someone with intimate knowledge of our network architecture conducted a surgical strike designed to look like an inside job. Owen finally turned to face her, and Sloan was struck by the transformation 3 weeks had wrought. Gone was any trace of the invisible janitor. In his place stood someone who radiated competence and barely contained fury. The kind of operation that requires months of planning and detailed intelligence about our security measures. Kendrick. Kendrick was just the opening act. Owen gestured to the screens around them, each displaying different aspects of the digital assault. This is Meridian Corp showing their true colors. They're not just trying to buy your company anymore, they're trying to destroy it. Sloan sank into a chair, the magnitude of the situation hitting her like a physical blow. The altered contract documents, if clients start believing we can't deliver on our promises, your reputation gets destroyed, your stock price crashes, and Meridian Corp can acquire your assets for pennies on the dollar while looking like they're doing everyone a favor by cleaning up the mess. Owen's expression was grim. It's a scorched earth strategy. Can you prove it was them? Owen was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still moving across keyboards as data streams flowed across his monitors. Proving it legally would take months of forensic analysis and probably wouldn't hold up in court anyway. But stopping it, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. That's a different question entirely. Before Sloan could ask what he meant, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something in her gut told her to answer it anyway. Ms. Davenport, this is Harrison Peterson. The voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I think we need to have a conversation about these documents that are all over the internet. Sloan closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Mr. Peterson, I can explain. Can you explain why your company promised us delivery capabilities you don't possess? Can you explain why you claim to have manufacturing partnerships that apparently don't exist? Because right now it looks like my company just signed a $50 million contract based on outright fraud. Those documents have been altered, Sloan said desperately. Mr. Peterson, I swear to you, every commitment we made was completely accurate. Someone is trying to sabotage our partnership. Ms. Davenport, I want to believe you. Your presentation in Vancouver was impressive, and your vision for our collaboration genuinely excited my team. But these leaked documents... Peterson's voice trailed off. I'm going to have to recommend that my board suspend the contract pending a full investigation. The line went dead, leaving Sloan staring at her phone in numb disbelief. $50 million, the lifeline that was supposed to save her company, had just evaporated because of lies spread by people who wanted to watch her empire burn. Sloan, Owen's voice was gentle but urgent. There's something else you need to see. She looked up to find him pointing at a news feed on one of his monitors. The headline made her blood freeze. Davenport Industries CEO under federal investigation for securities fraud. They've escalated beyond corporate warfare, Owen said quietly. This is character assassination designed to make sure you can never rebuild, even if the company survives. Sloan felt something break inside her chest, not her spirit, but something deeper and more fundamental. The carefully constructed world of boardroom battles and corporate strategy suddenly seemed like a child's game compared to the systematic destruction she was witnessing. What do I do? She whispered, hating the vulnerability in her own voice. Owen stood up from his workstation and moved toward her with the deliberate precision she'd seen him use in the helicopter cockpit. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd faced impossible odds before and survived. You fight back, but not on their terms and not with their weapons. His gray eyes held hers steadily. Meridian Corp is counting on you to play defense, to spend all your energy trying to disprove their lies while they continue the assault. Instead, we take the fight to them. How? By giving you something they can't attack, can't discredit, and can't explain away. Owen moved to another computer terminal and began pulling up what looked like financial records. Harrison Peterson isn't the only powerful person who's been burned by Meridian Corp's business practices. There's someone else, someone with the resources and motivation to not just clear your name, but to expose exactly what kind of company Meridian really is. Who? Owen's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up a profile that made Sloane's breath catch. The photograph showed an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that radiated intelligence and barely contained fury. Victoria Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Aerospace. 2 years ago, Meridian Corp destroyed her company using almost identical tactics. Leaked documents, planted stories, coordinated attacks on her reputation. The only difference is, they succeeded with her. Sloane studied the photograph, noting the unmistakable look of someone who'd been betrayed by people they'd trusted. Why would she help us? Because Sterling Aerospace was developing revolutionary propulsion technology that could have changed the entire aerospace industry. After Meridian Corp acquired the company's assets, they buried the research and fired the entire development team. Owen's voice carried an edge of personal anger. Victoria Sterling has spent the last 2 years gathering evidence of Meridian Corp's illegal business practices. She just needs a platform to expose them. What kind of platform? The kind that comes from a high-profile legal battle where she testifies as an expert witness about corporate sabotage and industrial espionage. Owen turned to face her fully. Sloane, if we can get to Victoria Sterling and convince her to work with us, we don't just save your company. We take down the people who've been destroying innovative businesses across the entire industry. Sloane felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced since Vancouver, hope mixed with the kind of fierce determination that had built her empire in the first place. Where is she? Owen glanced at his watch, then at the weather report streaming across another monitor. Her private retreat in the San Juan Islands, completely isolated. No phone service, no internet. The only way to reach her is by boat or helicopter. He paused, meeting her eyes with an expression that was part challenge, part invitation. And there's a storm system moving in that's going to make both options extremely dangerous. The implications hit Sloane like a physical force. Owen was proposing they fly into what meteorologists were calling the worst Pacific Northwest storm in a decade to reach a woman who might or might not be willing to help them, based on the chance that her testimony could save a company that was already hanging by a thread. That's insane, she said quietly. Yes, it is. Owen's smile was the expression of someone who'd made a career out of impossible missions. But it's also the kind of move Meridian Corp would never expect, which gives us the element of surprise. Sloane looked around the server room, taking in the screens full of evidence of systematic destruction. The financial projections that showed her company bleeding out the news feeds that painted her as everything from incompetent to criminal. Then she looked at Owen, whose calm presence had become the one constant in a world that seemed determined to tear itself apart. If we do this, she said slowly, and if it goes wrong, you'll have gone down fighting instead of hiding in a boardroom while your enemies destroy everything you've built. Owen's voice was gentle but implacable. And if it goes right, you'll have turned the tables on people who think they can destroy lives without consequences. The decision crystallized in Sloane's mind with the same clarity that had driven every major choice of her career. How long do we have before the storm hits? Owen checked multiple weather displays, his expression growing more serious by the moment. 4 hours until conditions become impossible. 6 hours until the storm peaks. If we're going to do this, we need to leave now. Then let's go remind Victoria Sterling that some fights are worth having. 30 minutes later, as Owen conducted his pre-flight inspection of the Augusta 109 under increasingly ominous skies, Sloane found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken in the past month. 4 weeks ago, Owen Grant had been an invisible presence in her peripheral vision. Now he was preparing to risk his life flying her through a potentially deadly storm to meet a woman who might hold the key to saving her company. Sloane. Owen's voice carried over the rising wind as he completed his external checks. Before we take off, there's something you need to understand about what we're about to do. She looked up from her own preparations, emergency equipment, backup communications, the kind of gear she'd never imagined needing for a business meeting. What? Flying in weather like this isn't like our trip to Vancouver. The margins for error disappear completely. One mistake, one equipment failure, one moment of poor judgment, and we don't come back. His gray eyes were absolutely serious. I need to know that you understand what you're risking. I understand that I'm risking everything I have left on the judgment of a man I barely knew a month ago. Sloane's voice was steady, despite the wind that was beginning to rock the helicopter on its landing skids. I understand that if we don't take this risk, I lose everything anyway. Owen studied her face for a long moment, then nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. In that case, Ms. Davenport, let's go save your company. The takeoff was unlike anything Sloane had experienced before. Instead of the smooth ascent she remembered from their Vancouver flight, the helicopter fought for every foot of altitude against wind gusts that seemed determined to slam them back onto the helipad. Owen's hands moved constantly across the controls, making minute adjustments to compensate for the chaotic air currents that buffeted them from every direction. Jesus, Sloane breathed as the building fell away beneath them in a series of stomach-dropping lurches. This is just the warm-up, Owen replied, his voice professionally calm despite the violence of their ascent. The real fun starts when we clear the sound and hit the open water. As if summoned by his words, the helicopter broke free of the building's wind shadow and encountered the full fury of the storm system. Rain hammered against the windscreen with machine gun intensity, while wind gusts that Owen later estimated at 70 knots tried to flip them into an uncontrolled tumble. Can the helicopter handle this? Sloane asked, gripping her harness as they lurched through another air pocket. The helicopter can handle it, Owen replied, making a control input that brought them back to level flight. The question is whether I can handle it long enough to get us where we're going. For the next hour, Sloane watched Owen wage a silent war against the storm. His movements were economical and precise, never fighting the turbulence, but rather flowing with it, finding pockets of stable air and using them as stepping stones across the chaos. She began to understand that what she was witnessing wasn't just skilled piloting, it was artistry of the highest order, the kind of intuitive mastery that could only come from thousands of hours in similar conditions. Tell me about Victoria Sterling, she said during a brief lull in the turbulence, partly to distract herself from the violence outside, and partly because she realized she was about to stake everything on a woman she'd never met. Owen adjusted their heading slightly, following a course that seemed to thread between the worst of the storm cells. Brilliant engineer, ruthless negotiator, absolute integrity when it came to her people and her work. She built Sterling Aerospace from a garage startup into a company that was on the verge of revolutionizing space propulsion technology. What happened? Same thing that's happening to you, just more sophisticated. Meridian Corp spent 2 years infiltrating her organization, stealing research, sabotaging relationships with investors. When she finally realized what was happening, it was too late to save the company. Owen's voice carried a personal edge that Sloane was learning to recognize. She lost everything, her life's work, her team, her reputation. Meridian Corp made sure she'd never work in aerospace again. And you think she'll risk exposing herself to help us? I think Owen said, banking into a turn that brought the San Juan Islands into view through the storm, that some people reach a point where revenge becomes more important than safety. The islands appeared and disappeared through the driving rain like ghosts, their familiar contours transformed by the storm into something alien and threatening. Owen flew with the precision of someone following a memorized route, threading between peaks that vanished into low-hanging clouds and navigating by instruments when visibility dropped to near zero. There, he said, finally pointing toward what looked like a wall of rain and mist. Sterling's retreat is in that cove about 2 miles inland. Sloane peered through the windscreen, seeing nothing but gray chaos. How can you possibly know where we are? GPS terrain mapping and 20 years of flying in conditions where approximately gets you killed. Owen's hands never stopped moving on the controls as he began their descent. Plus, I scouted this location 3 days ago when I realized we might need to find Victoria Sterling in a hurry. You've been planning this. I've been planning for every contingency I could think of. Owen's voice was grim as he fought to maintain control during their approach. Meridian Corp has been escalating their attacks systematically. I knew eventually they'd push things to the point where conventional responses wouldn't be sufficient. The landing was a masterpiece of precision, flying under impossible conditions. Owen brought the helicopter down through shifting wind patterns and zero visibility to settle onto what turned out to be a small clearing barely large enough to accommodate the aircraft's rotor diameter. As the engines wound down, Sloane realized she'd been holding her breath for the last 10 minutes. "Welcome to Storm Island," Owen said with dark humor as they prepared to shut down. "Population 1 very angry former CEO who's about to get the surprise of her life." The walk to Victoria Sterling's retreat took 20 minutes through rain that felt like being attacked by liquid bullets. Owen led the way with the confident stride of someone who'd navigated hostile terrain in worse conditions, while Sloane followed, marveling at how quickly her expensive business attire became a sodden mess. The cabin that emerged from the storm was modest but well-built, designed to withstand exactly the kind of weather they were experiencing. Warm light glowed from windows that suggested someone was home, and smoke rose from a chimney that promised heat and shelter. "Remember," Owen said as they approached the front door, "Victoria Sterling has every reason to distrust anyone connected to the aerospace industry. We need to prove we're not another Meridian Corp trick before she'll even listen to our proposal." Sloane was about to respond when the door opened to reveal a woman who matched her photograph in every detail except the expression of absolute fury that blazed in her silver eyes. Victoria Sterling stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, and in her hands was a shotgun pointed directly at Owen's chest. "I don't know who you are or who sent you," Victoria said in a voice that could have cut diamond. "But you have exactly 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't assume you're here to finish the job Meridian Corp started." Owen raised his hand slowly, but his voice remained calm and respectful. "Ms. Sterling, my name is Owen Grant. This is Sloane Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries. We're here because Meridian Corp is trying to destroy her company using the same tactics they used against Sterling Aerospace, and we need your help to stop them." Victoria's eyes shifted to Sloane, and her expression changed from hostility to sharp interest. "Davenport Industries, the company that's been all over the news for securities fraud. The company that's being framed for securities fraud by people who want to acquire our assets," Sloane corrected, stepping forward despite the shotgun. "Ms. Sterling, I know you have no reason to trust us, but Owen was right. We're fighting the same enemy that destroyed your company." For a long moment, Victoria studied them both with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read deception in every gesture and inflection. Finally, she lowered the shotgun and stepped aside. "You flew through this storm to find me," she said, her voice carrying a grudging respect. "Either you're completely insane, or you're desperate enough to be telling the truth. Come inside before you both drown and we'll figure out which it is." The interior of the cabin was sparse but comfortable, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that threw dancing shadows across walls lined with photographs and technical drawings. Sloane recognized some of the aerospace designs from her own research into next-generation propulsion systems, while others were clearly beyond anything currently being developed by conventional companies. "You said Meridian Corp is using the same tactics against you that they used against me," Victoria said as she poured coffee that smelled like salvation. "Be specific." For the next hour, Sloane and Owen laid out the entire scope of Meridian Corp's assault on Davenport Industries: the planted intelligence, the sabotaged contracts, the systematic destruction of relationships and reputation. Victoria listened with the focused attention of someone hearing a familiar and hated story, occasionally asking questions that revealed an intimate understanding of corporate warfare. "The Peterson Group contract," Victoria said finally. "Tell me about the altered documents." Sloane described the leaked papers that had destroyed her partnership, watching Victoria's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire with eyes that held old pain and new fury. "They used almost identical language against Sterling Aerospace," Victoria said quietly. "Promises we never made, capabilities we never claimed, delivery schedules that were mathematically impossible. By the time we could prove the documents were fabricated, the damage was done." "But you had proof," Owen said. "You had evidence that the documents were forged." Evidence that disappeared when Meridian Corp's legal team convinced a federal judge that our servers had been compromised by disgruntled employees trying to cover up their own fraud. Victoria's voice was bitter with remembered betrayal. Amazing how quickly evidence vanishes when the people evaluating it have financial relationships with your enemies. Sloan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. You're saying the system is rigged. I'm saying that Meridian Corp has spent decades building relationships with the right people in the right places. Judges, regulatory officials, financial analysts, journalists, they have influence networks that span the entire aerospace industry. Victoria stood up and moved to a filing cabinet, withdrawing a thick folder that she set on the coffee table between them. But influence networks can be exposed if you have the right evidence and the right platform. Owen leaned forward, his expression intense. What kind of evidence? Victoria opened the folder to reveal what looked like years of documentation, financial records, communication intercepts, legal documents, and photographs that showed Meridian Corp executives in compromising situations. 2 years of investigation, Victoria said with satisfaction. 2 years of following money trails, documenting connections, and building a case that could bring down not just Meridian Corp, but the entire network of corruption they've built around themselves. Then why haven't you used it? Sloan asked. Because I'm one person with a destroyed reputation going up against $1 billion corporation with unlimited legal resources. No prosecutor would touch the case. No journalist would publish the story. No regulatory agency would investigate the claims. Victoria's eyes met Sloan's with laser intensity. But if those same accusations came from the CEO of a currently operating aerospace company, if they were part of a high-profile legal battle that attracted media attention. You're talking about fighting back in court, Owen said, understanding immediately. I'm talking about turning their own tactics against them, Victoria corrected. Meridian Corp thinks they can destroy your company with lies and manipulation. Instead, we use their attack as a platform to expose every illegal thing they've done for the past decade. Sloan felt something ignite in her chest. Not just hope, but the kind of fierce determination that had driven every major success of her career. What would you need from us? I need you to file a federal lawsuit alleging corporate espionage, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud. I need you to make enough noise that the media has to pay attention, and I need you to be prepared for the fact that once we start this fight, Meridian Corp will try to destroy not just your company, but your life. The cabin fell silent except for the sound of rain hammering against the windows and wind howling through the trees outside. Sloan looked at Owen, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. This was the moment when they either retreated to conventional warfare or escalated to total war. If we do this, she said slowly, if we file this lawsuit and give you the platform you need, can you guarantee we'll win? Victoria's smile was the expression of someone who'd been waiting 2 years for exactly this conversation. I can guarantee that when I'm finished testifying, Meridian Corp will wish they'd never heard the name Davenport Industries. Owen checked his watch and glanced toward the windows where the storm showed no signs of abating. We need to get back to Seattle tonight if we're going to file paperwork first thing in the morning. Weather's not going to improve for at least 12 hours. Then we fly back in this, Sloan said, her decision made. Ms. Sterling, are you prepared to return to Seattle with us and begin this fight immediately? Victoria's answer was to close the evidence folder and stand up with the purposeful energy of someone who'd finally found a way to balance the scales. Ms. Davenport, I've been ready for this fight since the day Meridian Corp destroyed my life's work. The only question was whether I'd find the right allies to make it worth winning. The flight back to Seattle was even more harrowing than their approach to the island, with Victoria Sterling proving to be as fearless in a helicopter as she was in a boardroom. She spent the entire flight reviewing legal strategies with Sloan while Owen fought to keep them airborne through conditions that would have grounded commercial aviation for days. The key, Victoria explained over the intercom as they were buffeted by another wind shear, is understanding that this isn't really about your company or mine. This is about whether innovators and entrepreneurs can build something meaningful without being destroyed by corporate predators who see creativity as a threat to their market dominance. As the lights of Seattle appeared through the storm like beacons of civilization, Sloan realized that the past 24 hours had transformed her understanding of what she was fighting for. This was no longer about saving Davenport Industries or protecting her father's legacy. This was about proving that some principles were worth any risk and some fights were worth having regardless of the odds. "Owen," she said as they began their descent toward the familiar helipad. "After we land, after we file the lawsuit, after we start this war with Meridian Corp, what happens to us?" Owen's voice came back steady and certain over the storm's fury. "We find out what we're really made of, and we discover whether David still has a chance against Goliath when David has the right weapons and the right allies." As the helicopter touched down on the rain-slicked helipad 42 stories above a city that had no idea it was about to witness one of the most significant corporate battles in its history, Sloane felt the last of her old certainties fall away. Tomorrow would bring challenges that would test every skill she possessed and every principle she held dear. But tonight, as she climbed out of the helicopter beside two people who had chosen to stand with her against impossible odds, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, fighting exactly the fight that mattered most. The war for the soul of innovation was about to begin, and Sloane Davenport intended to win it. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle had witnessed countless corporate battles over the decades, but few had generated the media frenzy that surrounded Davenport Industries. Meridian Corporation on that rain-soaked Monday morning in November. Television crews lined the steps like an army of electronic sentries, their cameras tracking every movement as participants in what legal analysts were already calling the trial of the decade made their way through the courthouse doors. Sloane adjusted her charcoal suit jacket as she climbed the granite steps, acutely aware that every gesture was being recorded and analyzed by commentators who would dissect her performance for audiences across the country. Beside her, Victoria Sterling moved with the confident stride of someone who had waited 2 years for this moment, while Owen maintained his position slightly behind and to the left close enough to provide support, but positioned to observe everything around them. "Remember," Victoria murmured as they approached the courthouse entrance, "today is just the opening salvo. Meridian Corp's lawyers will try to discredit us before we even present evidence. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and let them make the first mistake." The courtroom itself was a cathedral of American jurisprudence, with soaring ceilings and dark wood paneling that spoke of countless decisions that had shaped the nation's commercial landscape. But as Sloane took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her attention was drawn inexorably to the defense table where Meridian Corporation's legal team had assembled like a precision military unit. At their center sat Marcus Heidelberg, Meridian Corp's CEO, a man whose silver hair and expensive suit couldn't disguise the predatory intelligence in his pale blue eyes. He'd built his empire by acquiring innovative companies and either absorbing their technology or burying it, depending on which strategy served his interests. Today he studied Sloane with the focused attention of a hunter evaluating prey. "Impressive turnout," Owen observed, quietly scanning the packed gallery with eyes that missed nothing. "Half the aerospace industry is here, plus every financial journalist in the Pacific Northwest." "That's exactly what we wanted," Victoria replied, organizing her files with the methodical precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment countless times. "The more attention this trial receives, the harder it becomes for anyone to bury the truth." Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who'd presided over complex corporate litigation for 3 decades. Her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for legal theatrics, which meant both sides would need to rely on substance rather than showmanship. "This court is now in session," Judge Morrison announced, her voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom. "We're here today for opening statements in the matter of Davenport Industries versus Meridian Corporation. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed." Victoria Sterling rose with the fluid grace of someone stepping onto a stage she'd been preparing for her entire career. As she walked toward the jury box, every eye in the courtroom followed her movement, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Victoria began, her voice carrying the perfect balance of authority and accessibility. "Over the next several weeks, you're going to hear a story about 2 very different kinds of companies. One builds its success by creating innovative solutions to humanity's greatest challenges. The other builds its success by destroying those who dare to innovate. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. The plaintiff, Davenport Industries, represents the American dream of entrepreneurship and innovation. Founded by a veteran who believed technology could make the world better, it has spent decades developing solutions that save lives, protect the environment, and push the boundaries of human achievement. Sloan felt a surge of emotion as Victoria painted a picture of her father's vision, the company he'd built with his own hands, and the legacy she'd fought to preserve. In the gallery, she could see employees from Davenport Industries, people whose livelihoods depended on the outcome of this trial. The defendant, Meridian Corporation, represents something entirely different. Victoria continued, her tone sharpening. It represents the dark side of American capitalism, the belief that crushing innovation is more profitable than fostering it, that destroying competitors is easier than outperforming them. Marcus Heidelberg's expression remained neutral, but Sloan caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested Victoria's words had found their target. Over the coming days, you will see evidence of a conspiracy so comprehensive, so calculated, that it reads like fiction. You will learn how Meridian Corporation infiltrated Davenport Industries with spies posing as employees. You will see documented proof of how they stole proprietary technology, sabotaged business relationships, and manufactured evidence to destroy my client's reputation. Victoria moved closer to the jury box, her voice taking on an almost intimate tone. But this case isn't just about corporate espionage or stolen technology. This case is about the kind of America we want to live in. Do we want a country where innovation is rewarded and entrepreneurs can build something meaningful? Or do we want a country where corporate giants can destroy anyone who threatens their dominance? As Victoria returned to her seat, the courtroom buzzed with anticipatory energy. Sloan felt a mixture of pride and terror. Pride in the eloquent case Victoria had made, terror at the magnitude of the battle they'd just officially declared. Meridian Corp's lead attorney, Jonathan Blackwood, rose to deliver the defense's opening statement. Tall and imposing, with the kind of commanding presence that intimidated opposing counsel and impressed juries, he represented everything Sloan had learned to distrust about corporate legal tactics. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood began, his voice dripping with condescension. You've just heard a compelling work of fiction from the plaintiff's counsel, a story about noble underdogs fighting against corporate tyranny. It would make an excellent movie script if it bore any resemblance to reality. He gestured dismissively toward the plaintiff's table. The reality is far more mundane and far more embarrassing for Ms. Davenport and her company. Davenport Industries is a failing business run by an inexperienced CEO who inherited a company she lacks the skills to manage. Rather than accept responsibility for her failures, she has chosen to blame her more successful competitors. Sloan felt her cheeks burn, but Owen's subtle touch on her arm reminded her to maintain composure. This was exactly the kind of personal attack Victoria had warned them to expect. The evidence will show, Blackwood continued, that every allegation made by the plaintiff can be explained by simple business incompetence. Missed deadlines, overpromised capabilities, failed quality control. These are the hallmarks of a company in decline, not the victims of some elaborate conspiracy. As Blackwood painted Davenport Industries as a company destroyed by its own inadequacies, Sloan found herself studying the faces of the jury members. Some seemed skeptical of his claims, while others appeared to be absorbing his narrative. The battle for their hearts and minds had begun. Meridian Corporation, Blackwood declared with theatrical conviction, is guilty of nothing more than being successful in a competitive marketplace. They have never stolen technology, never sabotaged competitors, never engaged in the kind of elaborate conspiracy the plaintiff describes. They have simply been better at business than their rivals. When Blackwood finished and returned to his seat, Judge Morrison called for a brief recess. As the courtroom emptied for a 15-minute break, Sloan found herself surrounded by reporters shouting questions about her company's prospects and her personal motivations for bringing the lawsuit. Ms. Davenport, how do you respond to Meridian Corp's claim that you're simply a failed CEO looking for someone to blame? Ms. Davenport, what evidence do you have that Marcus Heidelberg personally authorized the alleged espionage? Ms. Davenport, Is it true that you flew through a dangerous storm to convince Victoria Sterling to represent you? Owen materialized at her side with the smooth efficiency of someone trained in close protection, creating a buffer between Sloane and the aggressive reporters. No comment at this time, he said firmly, guiding her toward a conference room where they could regroup. How did they know about the storm flight? Sloane asked once they were safely behind closed doors. Because someone wants to paint you as reckless and desperate, Victoria replied grimly. Meridian Corp's public relations team has been working overtime to control the narrative around this trial. Every detail about your behavior gets scrutinized for signs of instability. Speaking of which, Owen added, checking his secure phone. There's been another development. Our forensic accountants found something interesting in Meridian Corp's financial records. He handed Sloane a tablet displaying what appeared to be a complex financial flowchart. 3 months ago, Meridian Corp established a subsidiary company called Pacific Northwest Consulting. On the surface, it appears to be a legitimate business advisory firm. In reality, it's a front operation for corporate espionage. Victoria leaned over to study the information, her expression growing more intrigued by the moment. This is exactly the kind of smoking gun we needed. If we can prove that Meridian Corp created a shell company specifically to conduct illegal activities, we can establish a pattern of premeditated conspiracy. Sloane finished, feeling a surge of hope for the first time since the trial began. How solid is this evidence? Solid enough to change the entire trajectory of this case, Owen replied. But we need to be careful about how we present it. Meridian Corp's lawyers will claim the subsidiary was created for legitimate purposes, and they'll have documentation to support that claim. Because they're experts at creating plausible deniability, Victoria added. The key is connecting the subsidiary's activities to specific acts of espionage against your company. We need to prove not just that Pacific Northwest Consulting exists, but that it was actively used to infiltrate and sabotage Davenport Industries. When court reconvened, Victoria called her first witness, Dr. Amanda Foster, Davenport Industries' head of research and development. Amanda took the stand with obvious nervousness, but her technical expertise and genuine passion for her work quickly became apparent to everyone in the courtroom. Foster, Victoria began, can you describe the nature of the research and development work being conducted at Davenport Industries? We focus on next-generation aerospace technologies, Amanda replied, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about her area of expertise. Specifically, we've been developing revolutionary guidance systems for unmanned aerial vehicles that could transform everything from package delivery to search and rescue operations. And how long has this research been ongoing? 3 years of intensive development building on foundational work that began during Mr. Thomas Davenport's tenure as CEO. Amanda glanced toward Sloane with obvious respect. The technology represents a potential breakthrough in autonomous navigation systems. Victoria moved closer to the witness stand. Dr. Foster, during the course of your research, did you ever observe any unusual interest in your work from outside parties? Jonathan Blackwood rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The question calls for speculation about the motivations of unidentified third parties. Sustained, Judge Morrison ruled. Counsel will confine her questions to facts within the witness's direct knowledge. Victoria adjusted her approach smoothly. Dr. Foster, did you ever observe any unauthorized access to your research facilities or materials? Amanda's expression grew troubled. Yes, actually. On several occasions over the past 6 months, I found evidence that someone had been in our secure laboratory after hours. Equipment had been moved, files had been accessed, and our computer logs showed activity during times when no authorized personnel were present. Did you report these incidents? I reported them to Mr. Shaw, our former CFO, but he dismissed my concerns as paranoia and suggested I was simply forgetting where I'd left things. Amanda's voice carried a note of frustration. It wasn't until after Mr. Shaw's termination that I learned my concerns might have been justified. Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive and thorough, but Amanda's technical knowledge and obvious sincerity made it difficult for him to undermine her credibility. As she left the stand, Sloane felt a growing sense that their case was gaining momentum. The next several witnesses painted a picture of systematic infiltration and sabotage that went far beyond normal business competition. Security personnel testified about unexplained breaches of supposedly secure areas. IT specialists described sophisticated cyber attacks that bore the hallmarks of corporate espionage. Financial analysts explained how seemingly random business setbacks formed a pattern when viewed collectively. But it was Owen's testimony that truly electrified the courtroom. Taking the stand in a dark suit that emphasized his military bearing, Owen projected an authority that made everyone sit up and pay attention. His background as a decorated Air Force officer lent credibility to his observations, while his 3 years working inside Davenport Industries gave him intimate knowledge of the company's operations. "Mr. Grant," Victoria began, "you spent 3 years working at Davenport Industries in various capacities. During that time, did you observe any activities that seemed inconsistent with normal business operations?" "I observed a systematic campaign of intelligence gathering and sabotage that bore all the hallmarks of a professional espionage operation," Owen replied, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone reporting tactical intelligence. Blackwood objected immediately. "Your Honor, the witness lacks the qualifications to identify professional espionage operations." Judge Morrison turned to Owen. "Mr. Grant, what qualifications do you possess to make such assessments?" 20 years as an Air Force intelligence officer, including extensive experience in counterintelligence and corporate security assessment," Owen replied calmly. "I've conducted similar operations in hostile environments and observed their effects on target organizations." The judge nodded. "The witness is qualified. Please continue, counselor." Victoria smiled slightly before proceeding. "Mr. Grant, can you describe specific instances of this alleged espionage campaign?" For the next 2 hours, Owen methodically detailed every suspicious incident he'd observed during his time at Davenport Industries. His testimony was precise, factual, and devastating. He described how Kendrick Shaw had systematically leaked confidential information, how security protocols had been compromised, and how business relationships had been sabotaged through carefully orchestrated misinformation campaigns. "In your professional opinion," Victoria asked, as Owen's testimony neared its conclusion, "was this campaign of espionage conducted by amateur opportunists or professional operatives?" "Professional operatives," Owen replied without hesitation. The level of sophistication, the coordination between different attack vectors, the careful timing of various incidents, this was a military-grade operation, conducted by people with extensive training in corporate warfare. Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal, focusing on Owen's transition from military officer to civilian employee, and suggesting that his allegations were motivated by resentment over his own career failures. But Owen's calm competence and obvious integrity made it difficult for Blackwood to discredit his testimony. "Mr. Grant," Blackwood said with obvious frustration, "isn't it true that you took a job as a janitor because you were unable to find employment commensurate with your claimed military experience?" Owen's smile was cold. "Mr. Blackwood, I took a job as a janitor because invisible people see things that important people miss. Sometimes the best intelligence comes from being underestimated." As the week progressed, Victoria systematically built her case with the precision of someone constructing an unassailable fortress. Each witness added another piece to the puzzle. Each document provided another link in the chain of evidence connecting Meridian Corp to the systematic destruction of Davenport Industries. The turning point came when Victoria called Marcus Heidelberg himself to the stand. Meridian Corp's CEO took the oath with the confidence of someone who'd never faced serious legal consequences for his actions. His expensive suit and commanding presence suggested a man who was accustomed to controlling every situation he encountered. "Mr. Heidelberg," Victoria began, her voice deceptively casual, "how would you characterize Meridian Corporation's relationship with Davenport Industries?" "Competitive, but professional," Heidelberg replied smoothly. "We operate in the same market sectors, so naturally, there's some overlap in our business activities." "Some overlap," Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "Would you consider Pacific Northwest Consulting to be part of that overlap?" For just a moment, Heidelberg's composure slipped. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening around his eyes, a fractional pause before responding, but everyone in the courtroom sensed that Victoria had just landed a significant blow. Pacific Northwest Consulting is a legitimate business advisory firm, Heidelberg said, his voice carrying an edge of defensiveness. I'm not sure what relevance it has to this proceeding. Victoria moved to the evidence table and retrieved a thick folder. Mr. Heidelberg, are you familiar with this document? She handed him a financial report that made his face go pale. This appears to be a confidential internal report. It's a financial analysis of Davenport Industries' vulnerabilities prepared by Pacific Northwest Consulting and delivered to Meridian Corporation's Strategic Planning Department. Victoria said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd just played a winning card. Are you telling this court that Meridian Corp commissioned detailed intelligence reports on its competitors without your knowledge? Heidelberg's attorney was on his feet immediately. Objection counsel is asking the witness to speculate about the nature and purpose of confidential business documents. Your Honor, Victoria replied calmly, I'm asking Mr. Heidelberg to explain how his company came to possess detailed internal intelligence about my client's operations. Judge Morrison studied the document briefly before ruling. The witness will answer the question. Heidelberg's response was carefully measured, but his obvious discomfort suggested he knew he was walking into a trap. Meridian Corporation conducts routine competitive analysis as part of our strategic planning process. This is standard business practice throughout the industry. Standard business practice, Victoria repeated. Mr. Heidelberg, would you consider detailed floor plans of a competitor's research facilities to be part of standard competitive analysis? She produced another document from her folder, architectural drawings of Davenport Industries' most secure laboratory spaces, complete with security protocols and access codes. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as the implications became clear. Heidelberg stared at the drawings with obvious shock, clearly seeing them for the first time. I have no knowledge of how my company obtained these documents, he said, his voice strained. But you don't deny that your company did obtain them. Heidelberg hesitated, clearly recognizing the legal trap Victoria had constructed around him. I would need to consult with my legal team before commenting further on confidential business materials. Victoria's smile was the expression of someone who'd just achieved checkmate. No further questions, Your Honor. The remainder of Heidelberg's testimony was a masterclass in legal destruction. Victoria systematically presented evidence of Meridian Corp's espionage activities, each document more damaging than the last. Financial records showed payments to known corporate intelligence operatives. Communication intercepts revealed coordination between Meridian Corp executives and the sabotage campaign against Davenport Industries. Personnel files demonstrated that several Meridian Corp employees had previously worked for intelligence agencies. By the time Heidelberg left the stand, his commanding presence had been replaced by the demeanor of someone who understood that his empire was crumbling around him. The trial's final witness was Victoria herself, testifying about her own experiences with Meridian Corp's predatory practices. Her testimony was personal, passionate, and utterly compelling, as she described how the same tactics being used against Davenport Industries had destroyed Sterling Aerospace. This isn't about business competition, Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. This is about a systematic campaign to eliminate innovation from the aerospace industry. Meridian Corporation doesn't want to compete, they want to control. They don't want to innovate, they want to acquire innovation and bury it. She turned to address the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence you've seen over the past 2 weeks proves beyond any reasonable doubt that Meridian Corporation engaged in criminal conspiracy to destroy Davenport Industries. But this case is about more than one company's survival. It's about whether we're going to allow corporate predators to eliminate innovation from American business. When the jury retired to deliberate, Sloan found herself in the courthouse cafeteria with Owen and Victoria, waiting for a verdict that would determine not just the future of her company, but the trajectory of the entire aerospace industry. How do you think we did? She asked, though the question felt almost surreal after everything they'd been through. We presented a compelling case, Victoria replied carefully. The evidence was strong, the witnesses were credible, and Heidelberg's testimony was an unmitigated disaster for their defense. But, Owen prompted, sensing the uncertainty in Victoria's tone. But juries are unpredictable, especially in complex corporate cases. Meridian Corp's lawyers did an effective job portraying you as an inexperienced CEO who got in over her head. Some jurors might find that narrative more believable than the idea of an elaborate corporate conspiracy. They didn't have to wait long for their answer. After only 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the corporate world. "We find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts," the jury foreman announced. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $200 million and punitive damages in the amount of $500 million. The courtroom exploded in cheers and gasps as the magnitude of the verdict became clear. $700 million, one of the largest corporate espionage awards in American legal history. More importantly, the verdict established legal precedent that would make it far more difficult for companies like Meridian Corp to engage in predatory practices against innovative competitors. As reporters swarmed around them outside the courthouse, Sloan felt a strange sense of unreality. 3 months ago, she'd been a struggling CEO watching her father's company die. Today, she was the public face of a legal victory that would reshape the aerospace industry. "Ms. Davenport," a reporter called out, "what's next for Davenport Industries?" Sloan looked at Owen and Victoria, the two people who'd risked everything to stand with her in this fight. What's next is rebuilding. What's next is proving that innovation and integrity can triumph over corporate greed. What's next is making sure that what happened to us never happens to another company with the courage to dream big. But even as she spoke those words, Sloan knew the real battle was just beginning. Meridian Corp would appeal the verdict, and their allies in the corporate world would find new ways to wage war against companies that threatened their dominance. The victory in court was significant, but it was only the first step in a much longer campaign. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Owen's voice was quiet but determined. "You know this isn't over, right? Heidelberg and his allies won't just disappear because they lost one court case." "I know," Sloan replied, feeling the weight of the challenges ahead. "But for the first time in months, I'm not facing those challenges alone." Victoria smiled, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd finally achieved a measure of justice. "Ms. Davenport, I have a feeling that Meridian Corp is about to discover what happens when they pick a fight with the wrong people." As evening settled over Seattle and the media circus dispersed, the three unlikely allies found themselves in a quiet restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, sharing a meal that felt more like a celebration than a business dinner. The legal victory was significant, but the personal bonds forged in the crucible of their shared struggle felt even more important. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Davenport Industries would need to be rebuilt from the ground up, incorporating the lessons learned from their brush with destruction. The aerospace industry would need to adapt to new legal precedents that protected innovation while punishing predatory practices. But tonight, as Seattle's lights reflected off the dark waters of Puget Sound, Sloan allowed herself to savor a moment of triumph that had seemed impossible just a few months before. She'd saved her father's legacy, exposed corporate corruption, and discovered allies who understood that some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. The war for the soul of American innovation was far from over, but today belonged to the dreamers and builders rather than the predators and destroyers. And that, Sloan reflected, was a victory worth celebrating. 6 months after the verdict that had sent shockwaves through corporate America, Sloan stood in the newly renovated lobby of Davenport Industries, watching employees stream through doors that bore a bronze plaque reading, "Thomas Davenport Memorial Innovation Center." The $700 million settlement had done more than save her company. It had transformed it into something her father could never have imagined. The dedication ceremony was beautiful, Owen said, joining her beside the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. He'd traded his coveralls for a tailored suit months ago, but something in his bearing still carried the quiet watchfulness that had first caught her attention. "Dad would have been amazed by all this," Sloan replied, gesturing toward the bustling activity around them. "When he started this company, he just wanted to build things that mattered. I don't think he ever imagined it would become a symbol of something larger." The transformation of Davenport Industries had indeed become symbolic of a larger shift in American business culture. The legal precedent established by their victory had inspired dozens of similar lawsuits against predatory corporations, while the company's new Innovation Protection Initiative had become a model for how established businesses could nurture rather than acquire emerging technologies. Speaking of symbols, Owen said with a slight smile, Victoria's congressional testimony this morning is already trending on social media. Apparently, her recommendation for federal legislation to protect innovative startups has bipartisan support. Sloan felt a surge of pride for the woman who had become both mentor and friend. Victoria's journey from discredited exile to corporate reform advocate had captivated public attention, but Sloan knew the real victory was more personal, the restoration of purpose to someone who'd thought her fighting days were over. She's found her calling, Sloan observed, protecting innovators instead of just being one. As they watched a group of young engineers emerge from the elevator, their animated discussion about next-generation propulsion systems, a reminder that the company's core mission remained unchanged despite its elevated profile. Among them was Dr. Amanda Foster, whose research had been key to their legal victory and who now headed the expanded R&D division. The quarterly projections came in this morning, Owen said, pulling out his tablet to display financial charts that would have seemed impossibly optimistic just a year earlier. Revenue up 300%, workforce doubled, and we have a waiting list of companies wanting to partner with us on joint ventures. And Maya, Sloan asked, referring to Owen's daughter, whose presence in his life had been one of the most significant revelations of their deepening relationship. Owen's expression softened in the way it always did when he spoke of his 8-year-old daughter. She's convinced that working at a superhero company makes me cooler than her friends' dads, who are just regular pilots and doctors. He paused, his voice taking on a more serious tone. She's also been asking when she gets to meet the lady boss who helped Daddy become important again. The comment hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither had been willing to address directly, despite the growing intimacy of their professional partnership. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved far beyond CEO and security director, though both had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Maybe it's time she did, Sloan said quietly, meeting Owen's eyes directly for the first time in their conversation. Meet the lady boss, I mean. Before Owen could respond, Mark approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. Ms. Davenport, the team from National Geographic, is here for the documentary interview, and the Wall Street Journal photographer wants to do some shots on the helipad for their cover story. The media attention had been relentless since the trial, with Sloan's transformation from corporate pariah to business hero capturing imaginations across the country. Books were being written about the case. Business schools were teaching courses on corporate espionage defense, and Sloan herself had become a sought-after speaker on innovation and integrity. The helipad, Sloan mused, glancing at Owen with an expression that held memories of storm flights and impossible decisions. I suppose there's some poetic justice in that. As they made their way to the roof, Sloan reflected on how much had changed since that evening when she'd mockingly challenged her janitor to fly her helicopter. The Augusta 109 still sat in its familiar position, but it now served as corporate transport for a company that frequently flew teams to innovation conferences and partnership meetings across the country. The National Geographic crew had set up their equipment to capture both the helicopter and the Seattle skyline in the background, creating a visual narrative that emphasized Davenport Industries' rise from near destruction to industry leadership. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist named Patricia Chen, had clearly done her homework on the company's remarkable turnaround. Ms. Davenport, Patricia began once the cameras were rolling. 6 months ago, you were facing bankruptcy and federal investigation. Today, your company is being hailed as a model for ethical business practices and innovative thinking. What changed? Sloan considered the question carefully, aware that her answer would be preserved for posterity and analyzed by business students for years to come. What changed was my understanding of what real strength looks like. I thought strength meant having all the answers, controlling every variable, never showing vulnerability. I learned that real strength means recognizing when you need help and having the courage to trust the right people. The right people, Patricia repeated. Are you referring to Victoria Sterling and Owen Grant? I'm referring to anyone who's willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous or difficult. Sloan glanced at Owen, who was monitoring the interview from just outside camera range. Sometimes the most important allies are the ones you never notice until you really need them. The interview continued for another hour, covering everything from the legal strategy that had defeated Meridian Corp to the company's plans for future growth. But as the crew packed up their equipment, Patricia approached Sloan with a more personal question. Off the record, she said quietly, there are rumors about a romantic relationship between you and Mr. Grant. Any truth to that? Sloan felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. Mr. Grant is my most trusted advisor and closest friend. Beyond that, I think some aspects of our relationship should remain private. Patricia smiled knowingly. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, the way you two look at each other tells its own story. As evening approached and the building emptied of all but essential personnel, Sloan found herself alone with Owen in her office, reviewing plans for the company's expansion into international markets. The familiar rhythm of their collaboration had become one of the most rewarding aspects of her professional life, but tonight felt different somehow. The Singapore partnership looks promising, Owen said, studying financial projections on his laptop. Their government is offering significant incentives for companies that relocate advanced manufacturing operations to Southeast Asia. Sloan murmured, though her attention was focused more on watching Owen work than on the substance of his analysis. Over the months, she'd come to appreciate not just his strategic insights, but the way his mind worked, methodical, creative, always thinking 3 moves ahead. You're not listening, Owen observed, looking up with an expression of amused exasperation. I'm listening, Sloan protested, though they both knew it wasn't true. Singapore manufacturing government incentives. Owen closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, studying her with the focused attention that had once made her uncomfortable, but now felt like coming home. What's really on your mind? Sloan stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like earthbound stars. Do you ever think about that night? The first night when I challenged you to fly the helicopter? Every day, Owen replied without hesitation. I was so arrogant. Sloan continued, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. I thought I was mocking some poor janitor who'd gotten ideas above his station. I had no idea I was talking to someone who would end up saving everything I cared about. Owen joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. You weren't arrogant. You were desperate and surrounded by people you couldn't trust. That kind of situation makes anyone defensive. Is that your professional assessment, Colonel Grant? Sloan asked, using the title she knew still carried emotional weight for him. That's my personal assessment, Sloan Davenport, Owen replied, his voice carrying an intimacy that made her pulse quicken. Professional assessments are what I give to clients and colleagues. Personal assessments are what I give to people who matter. The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken feelings and carefully maintained boundaries. For 6 months, they danced around the attraction that had been building since their first flight together, both understanding that their professional relationship was too important to risk on personal complications. Owen. Sloan began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the feelings that had been growing stronger with each shared challenge and victory. I know, Owen said quietly. I feel it too. Before Sloan could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message that made her smile despite the emotional intensity of the moment. It's from Victoria. She wants to know if we're free for dinner tomorrow night. Apparently she has important news to share. Owen checked his own phone and laughed. I got the same message. Any idea what kind of important news requires both of us to be present? With Victoria, it could be anything from a new congressional appointment to a revelation about Meridian Corp's latest legal troubles. Sloan paused, struck by a sudden thought. Unless what? Unless she's decided to play matchmaker for 2 people who are too stubborn to admit they're perfect for each other. Owen's laugh was warm and genuine. That would be very much in character for someone who just spent 6 months orchestrating the destruction of a billion-dollar corporation. The following evening, Sloane and Owen found themselves at Victoria's waterfront condo sharing wine and salmon, while Victoria regaled them with stories from her congressional testimony and the political maneuvering surrounding proposed legislation to protect innovative businesses. "The pharmaceutical lobby is absolutely furious," Victoria said with obvious satisfaction. "Apparently, they've been using tactics similar to Meridian Corp's for years, and they're terrified that the new regulations will expose their practices." "Good," Sloane said firmly. "Maybe it's time some of these corporate giants faced real consequences for predatory behavior." As the evening progressed, Sloane found herself studying the interplay between her two closest allies. Victoria's maternal protectiveness toward both of them was obvious, while Owen's respectful admiration for Victoria's strategic brilliance had evolved into genuine affection. They'd become something none of them had expected, a family forged in the crucible of shared struggle. "There is one other matter I wanted to discuss," Victoria said as they moved to the living room for coffee. "I've been offered a position as head of corporate ethics for the Department of Commerce. It would mean relocating to Washington and taking a very public role in corporate reform." "Victoria, that's incredible," Sloane exclaimed. "You'd have real power to implement the changes you've been advocating." "Yes, but it would also mean leaving Seattle, leaving both of you." Victoria's expression grew serious. "I've come to think of you as the children I never had. The idea of being across the country while you're still building something extraordinary." Owen leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority that emerged whenever he addressed strategic decisions. "Victoria, this is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been working toward. The chance to protect innovators at a national level, to prevent what happened to Sterling Aerospace and nearly happened to Davenport Industries from destroying other companies." "He's right," Sloane added, though her voice carried genuine sadness at the prospect of losing Victoria's daily presence. "You have to take this position. It's your destiny." Victoria smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You two have become very wise in the past 6 months. Your father would be proud, Sloane, and your fallen comrades would be honored by who you've become, Owen." The conversation continued late into the evening, covering everything from Victoria's plans for her new position to Davenport Industries' ongoing expansion. But as they prepared to leave, Victoria made one final observation that would haunt both Sloane and Owen in the days to come. "You know," she said as they stood in her foyer, "I've watched you two work together for months now. I've seen you face impossible odds and emerge stronger. I've watched you build something extraordinary together, both professionally and personally, but I've also seen you hold yourselves back from something that could be even more extraordinary." "Victoria," Sloane began, but the older woman held up a hand. "I'm not trying to interfere. I'm simply observing that life is short, opportunities are rare, and love, real love, is the rarest thing of all." Victoria's eyes moved between them with laser intensity. "Don't let fear of complicating your professional relationship prevent you from exploring what might be the most important partnership of your lives." The drive back to Sloane's penthouse was quiet, both of them processing Victoria's words and their implications. When Owen pulled into the parking garage, neither made any immediate move to get out of the car. "She's not wrong," Sloane said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, she's not," Owen agreed. "But she's also not the one who would have to deal with the consequences if things went badly." Sloane turned to face him in the dim light of the parking garage. "Owen, in the past 6 months, we've faced corporate espionage, federal lawsuits, media scrutiny, and attempts to destroy everything we've built. Do you really think a romantic relationship could be more dangerous than any of that?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as he stared straight ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds and hard-earned caution. "Sloane, I've been in love before. I've built a life with someone, made promises about the future, believed that nothing could tear us apart." His voice grew rough with emotion. "When Sarah died in that helicopter crash in Afghanistan, I thought my world had ended. Losing her nearly destroyed me, and losing the future we'd planned together finished the job." Sloane felt her heart break for the pain in his voice. "Owen, what I'm trying to say, Owen continued, finally turning to meet her eyes, is that I know exactly how much it hurts to lose someone you love, and the thought of building something with you only to have it destroyed by circumstances beyond our control. He shook his head. I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that kind of loss twice. Sloane reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with infinite gentleness. Owen, look at me. When his gray eyes met hers, she continued with quiet conviction. I can't promise you that we'll never face loss or tragedy, but I can promise you that whatever we build together will be worth the risk. How can you be so certain? Because, Sloane said, her voice growing stronger with each word, I've spent the past 6 months watching you risk everything to protect something you believed in. I've seen you fly through deadly storms, face down corporate predators, and rebuild your entire life because you thought it was the right thing to do. Someone with that kind of courage doesn't deserve to live in fear of what might happen. Owen's resistance seemed to crumble as he listened to her words. Sloane, if we do this, if we take this step, everything changes. We can't go back to being just business partners if it doesn't work out. I don't want to go back, Sloane replied firmly. I want to go forward, with you. The kiss that followed was everything Sloane had imagined during the long months of carefully maintained professional distance. Owen's lips were warm and sure against hers, carrying the promise of possibilities that neither had dared to acknowledge until this moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily and staring at each other with wonder. Well, Owen said softly, I guess that settles that. 3 weeks later, as Sloane prepared for the company's annual board meeting, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single year. The meeting would be held in the new conference room that bore her father's name, attended by board members who now included both Victoria Sterling and Owen Grant in official advisory roles. The agenda was ambitious, covering expansion plans that would establish Davenport Industries as a global leader in aerospace innovation. The Peterson Group partnership had exceeded all expectations, leading to additional contracts worth over $2 billion. The Singapore manufacturing facility was ahead of schedule, and preliminary discussions were underway for similar operations in 3 other countries. But the most significant agenda item was one that hadn't been publicly announced: Sloane's proposal to establish the Thomas Davenport Foundation for Innovation Protection, using a portion of the Meridian Corp settlement to provide legal and financial support for entrepreneurs facing corporate predation. Nervous? Owen asked as he joined her in reviewing the presentation materials. His new role as Chief Strategic Officer had been unanimously approved by the board, though everyone understood that his real value lay in areas that couldn't be easily quantified. Excited, Sloane corrected. 12 months ago, I was fighting for the company's survival. Today, I'm proposing to use our success to protect other innovators from what we went through. Owen smiled, the expression carrying pride and affection in equal measure. Your father would be amazed by what you've accomplished. We've accomplished, Sloane corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you and Victoria. As if summoned by her words, Victoria's voice came through the intercom. Sloane, Owen, could you join me in the lobby? There's something you need to see. They found Victoria standing beside the memorial plaque, but her attention was focused on the television screen that displayed breaking news from the Department of Justice. The headline made Sloane's breath catch. Meridian Corporation's CEO Marcus Heidelberg arrested on federal racketeering charges. Apparently, Victoria said with obvious satisfaction, our legal victory inspired other victims to come forward. The federal prosecutor now has evidence of a criminal conspiracy spanning 15 years and affecting dozens of companies. On screen, they watched as Heidelberg was led away in handcuffs while his empire crumbled around him. The sight should have been satisfying, but Sloane found herself feeling more sadness than triumph. It's over, she said quietly. Really over. No, Owen corrected gently. This part is over. What we're building, that's just beginning. The board meeting that followed was a celebration of achievement and a planning session for an even more ambitious future. As Sloane presented her vision for the Innovation Protection Foundation, She was struck by how far she'd traveled from the desperate CEO who'd once mocked a janitor's offer to fly her helicopter. "The foundation will provide 3 tiers of support," she explained to the assembled board members. "Legal assistance for companies facing corporate espionage, financial backing for innovations that challenge established market leaders, and educational resources to help entrepreneurs recognize and defend against predatory practices." Board member after board member voiced enthusiastic support for the proposal, understanding that Davenport Industries' reputation for ethical business practices had become one of its most valuable assets. When the vote was called, it was unanimously approved. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Sloan found herself alone with Owen and Victoria in the conference room that bore her father's name. The 3 people who had saved her company and rebuilt her life sat in comfortable silence, each processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished together. "You know," Victoria said eventually, "when I agreed to represent you in that lawsuit, I thought I was helping one company fight off a corporate predator. I had no idea I was participating in something that would reshape the entire industry. When I took a job as a janitor at this company," Owen added, "I thought I was hiding from my past. I had no idea I was preparing for the most important mission of my life." Sloan looked around the conference room, taking in the view of Seattle's skyline and the photographs of employees who'd helped build something extraordinary. "When I challenged you to fly that helicopter, I thought I was making a sarcastic comment to embarrass someone who'd overstepped their bounds. I had no idea I was making the smartest business decision of my career." "Speaking of that challenge," Owen said, his voice taking on a playful tone that Sloan had learned to recognize, "I believe there was a specific promise made that night. Something about marriage if I could successfully pilot your aircraft." Sloan felt her cheeks warm as she remembered her mocking words from that fateful evening. "I believe I said, 'Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you.' Yes. And I did successfully fly the helicopter, multiple times under increasingly dangerous conditions." Owen's smile was the expression of someone about to claim a long overdue debt. "I'm just saying a promise is a promise." Victoria laughed delightedly. "Oh, this is perfect. You two are going to get engaged based on a bet made during corporate espionage proceedings." "It wasn't exactly a bet," Sloan protested, though her protest was undermined by her obvious happiness. "It was more of a challenge." "It was a promise," Owen corrected gently, standing up and moving around the conference table until he was kneeling beside Sloan's chair. "And I've learned that promises between us tend to be the most important decisions we make." The ring box that appeared in his hand was small and elegant, containing a diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows. But it was the expression on Owen's face that took Sloan's breath away, hope and love and the kind of quiet certainty that had carried them through every challenge they'd faced together. "Sloan Davenport," Owen said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided them through storms both literal and metaphorical. "Will you marry me? Not because of a helicopter bet, but because I can't imagine building a future without you." Sloan's answer was immediate and certain. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been designed specifically for her hand, which she later learned it had been. Owen had been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment to honor both the promise she'd made in jest and the love that had grown between them through shared trials and triumphs. Victoria's applause filled the conference room as Owen kissed his fiancée with the passion of someone who'd finally found his way home. When they broke apart, both were laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. "Well," Victoria said, wiping tears from her own eyes, "I suppose this means I'll have to stay in Seattle long enough to plan a wedding." "Actually," Sloan said, her voice bright with sudden inspiration, "I have a better idea. What if we got married on the helipad, where it all began?" Owen's laugh was pure joy. "A rooftop wedding on the site of our first flight together, I think that's perfect." 6 months later, on a clear September evening with the Seattle skyline providing a backdrop worthy of a fairy tale, Sloan Davenport and Owen Grant exchanged vows on the helipad where their story had begun. The guest list included everyone who had played a role in their journey, from Dr. Amanda Foster and the Davenport Industries research team to Harrison Peterson and his colleagues from the partnership that had saved the company. Victoria Sterling served as matron of honor, having postponed her move to Washington until after the wedding she'd helped orchestrate. Her speech during the reception was a masterpiece of wit and wisdom that brought tears to every eye in attendance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began raising her champagne glass toward the bride and groom. "I've had the privilege of witnessing many remarkable transformations during my career. I've seen startups become industry leaders, technologies revolutionize entire sectors, and individuals discover capabilities they never knew they possessed." She paused, her eyes finding Sloane and Owen among the assembled guests. "But I've never seen anything quite like what these two have accomplished together. They've transformed a company, reformed an industry, and proven that love and integrity can triumph over greed and corruption." The applause was thunderous, but Victoria held up her hand for silence. "More importantly, they've shown us that the most extraordinary partnerships begin with the courage to see potential where others see only problems." Sloane saw past Owen's janitor uniform to recognize the warrior beneath. Owen saw past Sloane's corporate exterior to recognize the innovator within. As the evening progressed and dancing began under the stars, Sloane found herself standing beside the helicopter that had played such a crucial role in their story. The Augusta 109 had been decorated with white ribbons for the occasion, transforming it from a utilitarian aircraft into a symbol of romance and adventure. "Any regrets?" Owen asked, joining her beside the aircraft that had carried them through so many challenges. "Only one," Sloane replied, her voice carrying mock seriousness. "I'm regretting that I waited so long to realize what I had right in front of me." Owen's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close as they swayed to music that drifted across the helipad from the reception. "Well, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As if on cue, a small figure broke away from the crowd of wedding guests and ran toward them with the unbridled enthusiasm of childhood. Maya Grant, resplendent in her flower girl dress, and still clutching the basket that had held rose petals, launched herself into Owen's arms with a giggle of pure delight. "Daddy, everybody's asking when you and Sloane are going to fly away for your honeymoon," Maya announced with the matter-of-fact tone that 8-year-olds used to discuss adult mysteries. "Where do you think we should go?" Sloane asked, accepting the role of stepmother with the same grace she'd brought to every other challenge in her life. Maya considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Somewhere with good flying weather and really tall buildings so Daddy can show off how good he is at landing helicopters in small spaces." Owen laughed, spinning his daughter around until her giggles filled the evening air. "I think we can arrange that. But first we need to finish celebrating with all our friends." As the three of them returned to the reception, Sloane reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken in the past year and a half. She'd begun as a struggling CEO fighting to save her father's legacy. She was ending as a successful entrepreneur, devoted wife, and loving stepmother, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her when standing was difficult. The evening's final surprise came as the reception was winding down and guests were beginning to leave. Victoria approached the newlyweds with an expression that carried both excitement and mischief. "I have a wedding gift for you," she announced, producing an envelope that was sealed with old-fashioned wax. "Don't open it now, wait until you're on your honeymoon, but I think you'll find it illuminating." "Victoria," Sloane said suspiciously, "what have you done?" "Nothing illegal, I assure you," Victoria replied with innocent eyes that fooled no one. "Let's just say that certain former Meridian Corp executives are about to discover that corporate justice has a very long memory." 3 days later, as Sloane and Owen sat on the balcony of their honeymoon suite, overlooking Maui's pristine beaches, they finally opened Victoria's mysterious envelope. Inside was a letter of congratulation and a newspaper clipping that made them both burst into laughter. The headline read, "Former Meridian Corp CFO Kendrick Shaw arrested for tax evasion and wire fraud." The accompanying article detailed how Shaw's attempts to hide money obtained through corporate espionage had led to federal charges that could result in decades in prison. "She really doesn't forgive or forget, does she?" Owen observed, setting down the clipping with obvious admiration. "Would you want her to?" Sloane asked, curling up against her husband's side as the Pacific sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Some people deserve to face consequences for their actions. Owen's arm tightened around her as they watched the sun disappear into the ocean, marking the end of another day, in lives that had been transformed by courage, integrity, and love. "Speaking of consequences," he said softly, "have I mentioned lately that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made?" "Only about a dozen times since yesterday," Sloane replied, though her voice carried nothing but happiness. "But I don't mind hearing it again." "Marrying you," Owen repeated obediently, "was the best decision I've ever made." As darkness fell over the Pacific and stars began to appear in the Hawaiian sky, Mr. and Mrs. Grant sat in comfortable silence, each contemplating the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect peace. They'd fought corporate predators, survived literal and metaphorical storms, and built something together that neither could have achieved alone. But more than that, they'd discovered that love, real love, was indeed the rarest and most powerful force in the universe. It could transform janitors into heroes, CEOs into partners, and impossible challenges into triumph. The helicopter that had started their story sat thousands of miles away on a Seattle rooftop, waiting for their return and the adventures that lay ahead. Davenport Industries continued to grow and innovate under the leadership they'd established, while the Thomas Davenport Foundation was already protecting entrepreneurs from coast to coast. Victoria Sterling was transforming corporate regulation from her new office in Washington, ensuring that the predatory practices of companies like Meridian Corp would face federal intervention. Marcus Heidelberg and his co-conspirators were facing justice in courts across the country, their empire of corruption finally crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. But in this moment, on this balcony overlooking the endless Pacific, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that two people who'd found each other against impossible odds were beginning the greatest adventure of their lives together. "Owen," Sloane said softly as shooting stars began to streak across the Hawaiian sky, "do you remember what you said that first night when I challenged you to fly the helicopter?" "I said a lot of things that night," Owen replied, though his voice suggested he knew exactly what she was referring to. "You said that flying was about finding a safe place to land." Sloane continued, turning in his arms until she could see his face in the starlight. "I've been thinking about that, and I realized something." "What's that?" "I spent years thinking that a safe place to land was a destination somewhere you arrived when you'd achieved enough success or accumulated enough security." Sloane's voice was soft but certain. "But you taught me that a safe place to land isn't a place at all. It's a person. It's someone who will be there to catch you when you fall, to guide you through the storms, and to celebrate with you when you soar." Owen's kiss was his answer, soft and sure, under the Hawaiian stars. When they broke apart, his voice carried the same certainty that had guided them through every challenge they'd faced. "Sloane Grant," he said, using her new name like a promise, "you are my safe place to land, today, tomorrow, and for every adventure still to come." As they sat together under the infinite Pacific sky, surrounded by the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve, both knew that their story was far from over. There would be new challenges, new innovations, new opportunities to stand up for what they believed in. There would be children to raise, companies to build, and a world to change through the simple revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, integrity over profit, and partnership over dominance. But whatever the future brought, they would face it together. The former janitor who'd learned to fly, and the former CEO who'd learned to trust, bound together by a promise that had begun as a joke and evolved into the foundation of everything that mattered. The helicopter bet had become a marriage vow, and both were exactly what they'd always been meant to be: promises worth keeping, adventures worth taking, and love stories worth living. In the distance, a shooting star traced its path across the Hawaiian sky, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of two people who'd discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest words, "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." They had flown, they had married, and they had found their safe place to land in each other's arms where it had been waiting all along.